they are notoriously perhaps one of the most strictest about drugs, including cannabis. And you will get in some very deep shit very quickly there with no recourse for the most part. And Thailand, for some reason, Americans confuse that with Thailand, where they think Thailand is so strict with cannabis, which it is not. People get busted with drugs here all the time, all the goddamn time. Oh my God, are people getting busted for truckloads, literally trucks full of drugs on a daily basis. Trucks. And it's not that big a deal. You get caught with an incredibly minuscule amount of drugs in Singapore and it's game over. So this is my point. If people come to Thailand, they're like, oh, wow, you legalized it now? That's amazing because you used to be so strict about it. No, idiot. You're thinking of another Asian country called Singapore. This is Thailand. And the reason Singapore is now warning everybody, because Singapore is a very, Changi Airport is one of the best airports in the world. The Singapore airport is Asia's main airport. Kind of like Frankfurt is Europe's main airport. I know the Americans are very confused at this point. But Frankfurt it's kind of like how in America, Chicago and what would we say, Dallas are like two of the main airports, right? And that's kind of confusing to non-Americans. Why would Dallas be such a big airport? Well, because American Airlines is based out of Dallas. And United's based out of Chicago. And so those are two incredibly major hubs for air flights going through America. Similarly, Singapore is perhaps the biggest hub in Asia, and Frankfurt's probably the biggest hub in Europe because of Lufthansa is based out of Frankfurt. So Singapore has the airport's probably the best airport in the world, by the way. Many global travelers often think of Singapore as the best airport in the world, and for many reasons it is. And Singapore is a place that does not play games with drugs. You will find yourself in jail forever. So, and they don't take any kind of excuses. So, now that Thailand has legalized cannabis, and a lot of people are going to be doing layovers in Singapore, you can see the recipe for disaster. And in fact, it's already started. And so that's why Singapore is doing a big announcement like, hey, idiots, we didn't change our rules about cannabis. We know Thailand did, and we know you're stupid when it comes to your travel plans, and you're going to end up coming over here with a minuscule amount that you think is okay in your country, but we are not your country, and we are going to jail you for the rest of your natural-born life. So be careful. Now, this headline is not going to be seen by anyone in the West, but they're going to be able to say, well, here's our headline that went in 40 different of the world's biggest publications. We told you so, and it's going to happen. There's going to be I guarantee a year from now, there's going to be a 60 Minutes documentary on, the hordes of idiot Americans who didn't pay attention and are now spending the rest of their lives in the Changi Hotel. Okay.
Changi Hotel, not too bad.
Right. So my non-tech news headline that I wanted to share, I just pinned to the top of the room, and Evan and I both wanted to share, let's put it that way, is from The Guardian, and it says, Spain and Portugal suffering driest climate for the past 1,200 years, research shows. And it goes into very specific detail as to exactly what's happening. Effects of human-caused global heating are blocking vital winter rains with severe implications for farming and tourism. Damn right. Well, not only that, if it keeps going, and it will, you better bet every last one of those crypto shitcoins you have, this is going to continue. Spain and Portugal suffering the driest climate in 1,200 years. According to research, most rain on the Iberian Peninsula falls in winter, and low-pressure systems blow in from the Atlantic. And basically, there's what are called the Azores, or Azores, that blow in. And basically, they're getting these a number of extreme large Azores are, in the last 100 years, is really unprecedented. When you look at the previous 1,000 years, that has big implications because an extremely large Azores means relatively dry conditions for the Iberian Peninsula and the Mediterranean. So it's more than just Portugal and Spain. It'll carry over into the Mediterranean. We could also conclusively link this increase to anthropogenic emissions. The Iberian Peninsula has been hit with increasing heat waves and droughts in recent years, and this year in May was the hottest on record. Forest fires that killed dozens of people in the region, followed by a heat wave 10 times more likely by the climate crisis, blah, blah, blah. You get the whole idea. So the weather systems are changing in a more consistent but extreme way, which is blocking the rains from falling on the plains in Spain. You know the old joke. The rains in Spain fall mainly on the plain. Well, not anymore, you idiots, because you fucked it up. And you've got these Azores blowing in, which are stopping the rains in Spain from falling on the fucking plains. And now you're going to have to move.
Wait, aren't the Azores mountains?
Yes. And by the way, there are also islands off the coast of Portugal.
Okay.
But they
And so
refer to
they're
them.
stopping the rain from.
Yeah, right, precisely. This it's like a high pressure, low pressure system. So the
Oh,
Azores
okay.
are high pressure, and it's the low pressures are when you get rains, right? So these Azore highs, as they're called, are pushing away the low pressure systems that normally bring the winter rains. And they are attributing, and they've got really nice graphs and everything about why and how precisely how the Azore highs are pushing away the winter low rains. And oh, by the way, it goes into olive production. Spain is also the world's biggest producer of olives. But grapes, oranges,
And
And
there's the
grapes. And
Portuguese
grapes.
rosé.
yeah,
And
Hey,
grapes,
grapes, that's
Tyler,
right.
yeah,
the
grapes, oranges,
Portuguese rosé.
damn right, grapes, oranges, and tomatoes. But rainfall has been declining by 5 to 10 millimeters a year since 1950, with a further 10 to 20% drop in winter rains anticipated by the end of the century. Another research has projected 30% decline in olive production in southern Spain and a fall in grape growing regions across the Iberian Peninsula by 25 to 99%. That means all of it by 2050 due to severe water shortages. Research in 2021 also linked the Azore highs to the summer monsoon in India. So, take note. Again, normally I follow up and I say, didn't some bald tech bro come in and warn us? Well, there's a bald tech bro warning you right now. And a year from now, he's going to say, didn't we have a bald tech bro come in here and warn our dumbasses that this was happening? This is in certain things in this version of the metaverse that we find ourselves collectively living in are unpredictable and seemingly random, and some things are not. Some things are rather dependable. Some things are, which make them much easier to predict looking forward. This is one of those such things. This is one of those things where if this was a casino, you'd want to go ahead and put all your chips on this one. That this trend is just getting started and will be continuing for our foreseeable lifetimes. And shit's going to get really, really, really dry. And I would move to Portugal in a heartbeat. I love that place. Boy, do I love that place. And the only thing that would stop me from going there is the fact that it's going to have severe water stress. And that's going to
And the
lead to,
food shortage. I mean, they
you stole the,
produce wheat, barley, corn, rice, potatoes,
you
grapes,
stole,
olives, tomatoes.
you
We're
stole
not
my
having.
point. That was the implication, which is that water is necessary for all the food production. And I want to be in, by the way, this article that I'm sharing was one of the top stories in Reddit today. And the people in Reddit were debating, and which God bless the Redditors, they have a story and then they talk about it in a similar way that we do, although they're using this old school kind of cryptic hieroglyphic thing called text to communicate about the article. And they're texting each other and they're saying, well, where's all the water going? And this Australian dude says, we're having evacuations down here in Sydney because it's raining so hard. And which we've never really had. It's unprecedented. Right. That's exactly what is happening. You're having certain areas are going to get drier, certain areas are going to get wetter, and you, my friend, want to be in one of those areas that's going to get wetter.
Oh man, add tuna, sardines, and all of those to the production, and you're seeing exactly what's going to be extremely expensive by next year and where the shortages are going to really be at peak.
See, Tyler, I try to approach, well, good morning, good evening, everyone. This is Aram. This climate issue has been ongoing. Everyone kind of knows that it's a problem. What is the solution? What is the biggest issue that caused this temperature increasingly, affecting the climate? So, number one is a carbon dioxide emission. The problem with carbon dioxide is non-destructible. Once it's produced, it's there and it's affecting our environment every single day. It's not only the carbon dioxide that human produce, and the trees are a very good way to get rid of that carbon dioxide. But the emissions from gas cars and how many metric tons of each car carbon dioxide contribution to the environment per year is just astounding. And that's something that we can all kind of stop doing. And once, we stop producing that carbon dioxide, the problem is how to remove that excess carbon dioxide from the environment, which is a very crucial problem, not solved yet. So we are already at that inflection point where the level of carbon dioxide is kind of unsustainable by our environment. This is a huge issue. I don't know why people don't take it that much seriously.
I'll
And
tell you
people who
why.
are
I
in
do know why.
environment, they do. Hmm.
They don't take it that seriously because as of right now, their convenience has not been interrupted. Their food supply, water supply, standard of living hasn't been significantly impacted. They could hear all the bad news all day long. They could hear that people all over the world are rioting and starving and dying. And by the way, we have been hearing that. We've been hearing that Ethiopia went through a famine and millions of people are dying. And we heard it a year ago. Afghanistan's going to fall and they're going to be starving and dying. Sri Lanka's, as we speak, is in a real pickle. And do you think people sitting in Los Angeles give one drop of piss about that? No. They could not. They could hear that shit every day for the next 50 years and not think twice about it. So, my
Tyler, that's not true, by the way, because you've been gone for a while. There are a lot of water restrictions that have been placed in Los Angeles in the last several years,
that's you're
places
proving my
where
point. You're proving my
Water
point.
restriction is not
That,
the solution. The solution is to stop further addition of carbon
that's
dioxide,
true. But my
period.
point is, Americans, people generally, this isn't an American issue, uh, will not make necessary changes until they feel until it hits them personally, impacts them in a meaningful way personally. So whether their water supply gets shut off, their food supply gets shut off, or something to that effect, they can hear stories all day long about how it's happening to other people and not feel compelled to take appropriate actions, which is foolish. People should be watching what's going on around them in the external environment beyond their own personal horizons and be able to calculate, doing a risk assessment of their situation because this is a global issue and eventually it will hit your ass and you don't want to
and,
be
and
standing there.
Tyler, that
Just real quick, no,
the
Los Angeles
water
Commission, the
water use
largest
in
solar farm in the
California,
world,
as you
actually on the
know,
books. So
excuse me, the water use in California is disproportionately from farmers. So
Yes,
people in Los Angeles really can't influence that. It's when California decides they don't want to be almond farmers anymore. You know.
right. Yeah. Chris, you were saying?
those food almonds are for exports, so in many ways to these areas essentially that are also having these issues. So I mean, it's tied in with food policy and specifically the exports part.
So let me give you an example of one of these headlines that should cause people to think think carefully, but doesn't. It just doesn't, but it should. So here it is. I'm pinning it to the top of the room now. I already did pin it, but it didn't show up. There it is. There we go. From Deutsche Welle, which is like Nikkei Japan out of Asia. Deutsche Welle out of Europe, out of Germany. Just both are fantastic publications. Thank God for both of them. Okay, so here it is. Sri Lanka's economic crisis is driving people to flee the country in desperation. Now, didn't some balding tech bro come in here and tell us that we're going to start seeing shit is going to start hitting fans and we're going to start seeing migrations? Large-scale migrations in our lifetime are going to become a huge thing. Here's one right here. Sri Lanka is suffering the worst economic crisis in its history with fuel shortages bringing the country to a standstill. Many are now convinced leaving is their only option. That where they live is no longer habitable. As the domesticated cats that they are, the house, mommy and daddy have run out of food, and it's been a week now, and they haven't put food in my bowl. I need to leave the house as a cat. Yes, you do. And that should give there's already let me put it this way, the intelligent people that I know are already debating which Chinese debt diplomacy country is next, because this is in some sense an outcome of Chinese debt diplomacy, what's happening in Sri Lanka. And the smart people that I know are already saying, is Bangladesh next? And in fact, I saw a headline today saying exactly that. Let me find it. Did somebody share that in the back channel? Is that where I saw it?
Yes, I'll pick it up and pin it on top soon.
Thanks. Yeah, I just saw the headline of it, but I didn't read that one. But it fits so perfectly with other communities that I just have these similar discussions in. Oh, here it is. In fact, hold on. I'll hand it to you next, Ken. Here it is. I just found it from our friend Vinay, who shared this in the back channel. Oh, here we go. Let me pin it for you. There it is. Or there it goes. There's a little delay going through the interweb pipes all the way from Thailand to wherever you are. Give it a second here. What's up with this delay here?
Yep, it's on already. It's pinned.
Oh, weird. I don't see it on my...
Wow, that's a line of people for the mass exodus. If you click at the link, do you see that picture? That's amazing.
Yeah, in that article that I pinned previously from Sri Lanka, it's massive. So the one that I just pinned, full credit goes to Vinay, and this is from the India Times. And it says, is Bangladesh next to fall in China's debt trap diplomacy? In a quest for rapid progress and development, Bangladesh is falling under the debt trap of China by sponsoring infrastructure projects. Four Chinese state-owned firms expressed their keenness to build their metro rail network in a recent affair, along with a smart city on the land in Chittagong with their own funds, in return for which the Chinese firms demand a share of the profits from the smart city after selling off the plots. Experts believe that the construction of the smart city on reclaimed land would adversely affect the environment, though Chinese companies are promising to use modern technologies in reclaiming land. However, it is known that China promises something and does something else after getting the projects. Okay, well, again, my point is that article from Sri Lanka should be circulating, going viral anywhere, as a warning sign of, instability, kind of large-scale instability in parts of the world, and it just doesn't. And just generally, people in California could not care. Even if they saw that headline, they would skip right past that in a heartbeat and wouldn't give it a second thought. So now, will people in Spain and Portugal on the 1200-year drought articles, how are they going to feel about it? I don't know. Anyway, so that's just my rant for today. Did anyone else have a non-tech news headline they want to jump into today?
Well, so I was just going to ask you, because you had mentioned a couple of weeks ago, by the way, that Thailand was getting too much rain.
Yes.
It got too much water, so that it was destroying the farming over there. So is that still an issue, or?
I wouldn't use the words too much. More than we have ever had at this time of year. We actually get more in other times of the year than we're getting now. So that's why I would hesitate to say that it's too much, because the amount that we're getting now is wildly a lot for this time of the year. it's not as much as we get in other times of the year. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a problem. It's concerning. It's definitely concerning. It's a great problem to have relative to lack of water. And by the way, there was, what my being here is a strongly correlated with the fact that we are, have decent water, happening. And if I was in the Iberian Peninsula, I would be very nervous, and I would be at this point I would be leaving because the trend lines are the correlation is pretty clear. It's clear enough for me to realize that long term, I don't want to be the last one out. I want to be the first one out. And similar to the trend lines that are starting to become undeniably clear in Southern California, for example, where I grew up. Most of my life was spent in Southern California. Most of the closest friends and family I have are in Southern California. So it brings me exactly zero joy and a whole lot of anguish to acknowledge that. How do I convince everyone that I've ever known to get up and get the fuck out of there before it's too late? Because when everyone decides they want to buy toilet paper at the same time, or they all want to buy the 48-inch screen on Black Friday at the same time, it gets a little chaotic. So you might want to be on the front end of that trend and not on the tail end of that trend, especially if you have
Tyler,
to sell a house in the middle of that process. Yeah, Matt?
just to make the point, so I'm in Southern California, and I was down at Dana Point, which is a
Lovely.
city in the southernmost part of Orange County before you hit San Diego County. And we were in the harbor, and we were talking to people that were older than me, probably by about 15 years. And we were just chatting, and they said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm going with the family, going to go, down to the harbor and watch the fireworks." And I said, "What are you doing?" And they said, well, "We're going to Beach Road." Beach Road is a road that connects Capo Beach to Dana Point on the northbound. And yeah, we're going to a beach. We've been going there for 25 years, 30 years. And I said, "So what's it like down there?" Well, then they started talking about the erosion. And they said, "Well, it was 33 steps from the house down to the beach, down to the water, and now it's 17." So we got
Right.
into a long conversation about erosion, which from year to year, it does go down and come back up. But generally, the trend line is that it's going down. And it really made me sit up and pay attention. So this is very timely.
I know exactly what you're talking about, because and everyone along the coasts, everywhere from Santa Barbara down to the Mexican border, knows what you're talking about. Which is, I
Yeah.
grew up on the beach there as well. And Southern California has these really beautiful eroded cliffs along the coast, from Santa Barbara all the way down to the Mexican border, and they're really
Focus
very.
on Cali. You focus on Cali, but did you? I just sent you a back channel via Twitter. There's
Uh-huh.
47.3% states in America that are facing drought as of June 28, 2022. So California might be what we're hyper focused on because it's always in the media, but we're seeing that specifically in the Midwest as well. A lot of our large bodies of water are receding, and they've been on water control for quite some time. So I sent that information to
Yeah,
you
I
in the
got
back channel. You should read it.
national.
And there's a global trend of receding and reduction in fresh water, but rising levels of sea around the coastlines, around the globe. All these cities close to the sea are kind of drowning.
I
Yeah.
invited Caroline on stage. I think she mentioned in the back channel that
By the
she's
way,
actually doing water brokerage for U.S. government.
I want to put an important cherry on the cake that I think Aram just pointed out about the sea level risings. One of the very severe consequences of sea level risings that people don't consider, that they absolutely must. Perhaps the most important consequence of sea level risings is contamination of the fresh water in the aquifers and the groundwater.
Yes.
So
Largest concern.
right. Well, for some people, they imagine the concern is, I have to move farther up the hill, or parts of downtown will be underwater, or what have you.
Or
Actually,
loss of land, that's not the problem.
loss of land. Right? Well, yeah. Well, it's really isn't, as the Dutch will tell you, because you can reclaim land right out of the ocean, as the Dutch
That's right.
are renowned for doing. And the size of the Netherlands has grown significantly because they continue to claim land out of the ocean due to whatever geoengineering
Yeah,
process.
like in Dubai and other coastal areas in the
That's,
east also, they have reclaimed lands.
yeah, that's a bit more of
Yeah, but I think the point that
standard.
you're talking about, Tyler, is Antarctica, for example, as it melts, there are microbes that we've never been exposed to in that water. Once they flush into ours, that in its of itself can create multiple pandemics, and that's the greatest concern for me.
Well, to me, the greatest concern is a bunch of low-lying areas. When the salt water gets sufficiently high, it will contaminate your drinking water.
Yes, loss of fresh drinking water is the greatest concern right now.
Yeah, very quickly, your water will go from drinkable to not drinkable, meaning your entire uh, municipality where you live, all of a sudden, overnight, instantly, doesn't have drinking water, and it doesn't have a solution at all for it.
You can reclaim sewage water to drinking water, like what Singapore is
Yes.
doing.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
by the way, reclaiming sewage water is vastly easier than doing desalination.
In Arizona, we are doing reclaiming sewage water for golf courses now, and we're
Right.
about to start desalinization.
Right. Okay. Any other non-tech news?
Yeah, Tyler, I just wanted to comment on the BRI thing. I sent you another one on the Indonesia,
Yes.
$3 billion actually going into Indonesia on the the sovereign fund.
Yeah.
The issue is China is, I mean, historically been planning strategically that this is what the picture they have in mind, that all these countries connected, their waterways, roadways, trains, and all that. The problem is that when they actually go into a particular country or like put the money into the infrastructure, without realizing that what happens with the countries, they actually grow with their own pace, like economically. So for another country to actually come in and pour all this money and then build all that infrastructure is not going to be in line with their own economic development. So over the time, I mean, yes, it happens in 15 years, 20 years, 30 years time that, they would actually catch up the pace, that this all infrastructure is going to be used there for them internally. Whereas they come in and then expect that this is going to actually empower them and then all this economic activity is going to happen all of a sudden. It's not going to happen all of a sudden. It's going to take time before they actually develop, that kind of economic activity, which is going to be actually using that infrastructure. So that's where the problem is. So in a shorter term, they are pouring all that money in, and obviously the countries are getting indebted because of that. But for the longer term, it's better for them. But how many countries are out there which they can last for that long to actually utilize that infrastructure? So that's the biggest problem. And they are actually trying to do that in seclusion without realizing that the country probably would have like 3 to 4% growth rate, which is not in line with all this money they are pouring in, which is going directly into the infrastructure and not in the actual economic activity. The only thing is been going into economic activity is to actually employ certain people, and that is not even happening because they bring in their own human resource, which is actually sit on the top, and then the below is like just like daily wage workers. So that's where their whole strategic planning is failing. And on the other hand, all these countries which we are talking about here are actually either have been in the IMF program or been going through the IMF program. So US turns around and say, you're not going to use my money or like IMF money or like whatever ADB money to pay off those loans towards Chinese. So there is this tussle is also happening. And recently they have asked IMF has asked a few countries that open up the books. We need to know whatever the contracts are in terms of the BRI, and you're not going to use this money to actually pay off that debt. So this is this dichotomy because of which that strategic plan on the higher level is not going to work. So I just wanted to share that insight. Thank you.
You're welcome. So the next, just as somebody, I think it was Thomas Tong, found this one from AP. Drought emergency declared for northern Italy. The Italian government on Monday, that's yesterday, declared a state of emergency for much of the rain-parched north amid a drought. The Po River, which waters help irrigate rice paddies, farm fields, and grazing land for cows, including some whose milk is used to make prized Parmigiano Reggiano cheese, is at its lowest level in about 70 years. And therein
Oh
lies therein
no!
lies now the Americans are going to feel it when as soon as we can't eat fucking
Don't
pizza,
mess with the Parmesan,
as
buddy.
soon as, as soon as
Parmesan
as soon as there's
cheese.
no cheese on the fucking pizza, all hell's going to break loose. As soon as the mac
There's
and
plenty of cheese in Wisconsin. No problem.
the party goes on.
Yeah.
Fuck
But
those Italians, whatever they got going on over there. We got plenty of cheese over here. Thank you very much. Thank you.
you mean the
Hey,
Word
Tony,
is
processed
set up.
cheese?
wasn't
No
mention my
Hey,
thanks.
pass me another slice of that deep dish over there, Ken.
Hey,
I'm
yeah,
selling
Tyler,
my
you
I'm
what do you
selling
do to
my
criminalize
house on
drugs?
the
By the way,
California coast and moving to Milwaukee, back to Milwaukee where I came from.
I'm living in Milwaukee, so I can share some insight. The prices has gone almost 80% on the
everywhere.
cheese and everything else. So yeah, get to reality. That's
Okay,
what
So
so
the
what's going to
reality is on the
happen to
ground.
the olive trees in Italy and Spain is very important.
well, a little further in the
That's
article
what
it
you're
says
talking
the
about.
drought has started to affect south central Italy. On Rome's Tiber River, plants growing on the riverbed can be seen on the surface, and debris floats in the shallow waters. Quote, the Tiber or Tiber, I honestly don't know how that's pronounced, the river in Rome. As I can say from my 40 years experience on the river, have never had a situation like this, says a boatman told AP on Monday. Yeah, so the rivers are drying up in Italy. And now, by the way, if you've been with us doing this tech news thing for a year or more, because we've been doing it for a little over a year, then you'll know that around this time last year, July, I was ranting like a lunatic, like I am today, about droughts and this trend and how it's going to be dire and the sky is falling and yada yada yada, as I'm known to do. And then in November, and November came around, December came around, California, and it was an incredibly, remarkably wet year in the rainy season. The rainy season delivered the much needed rain support that was so desperately needed, which I believe was a bit of a fluke. I think that was a very lucky outcome for last year. I would not bet. In fact, I would bet the opposite. I would bet that doesn't happen again this year. And then here's my point: is we're already back to being up Schitt's Creek without a paddle, and we had one of the wettest years on record during the rain season, which we probably won't get this year. So imagine where we will be a year from now if we don't get record wet levels in November, December. And then let that go for 2 years and 3 years and 4 years, that's the normal order of things is you get one of those wet years every 15, 20 years. We just had it last year and it saved our ass, but we're already back. We're already back to Schitt's Creek. So what are we going to do now that we're really not expecting another wet year this year? This is kind of my big point. So
I
anywho,
got a suggestion.
go
So
ahead.
this good time to mention that every day, Cheryl and I, every weekday, are now running rooms on precisely this:
Boom.
energy, water, food security on an individual to small community, say 150 people, sort of level. So yeah, and that's
You know
an
what,
hour and a
Ben?
half today,
You know what?
every day.
First of all, I love that you do those rooms, and I love that they dovetail nicely at the end of this room. And what I love most about it of all is that if you've been enjoying tech news for more than a minute, you know that Ben is a smart dude, and Ben also has this spidey sense for large trends over the horizon. Like when he could smell that Bitcoin was going to be big before you did, nearly everyone in this room, and he knew that video games was going to be big before most of you did. And he also knows that this is going to become such an incredibly massive social awakening, awareness movement of sorts, because it's going to impact and influence everybody in some sense in the rather near future. And why not be ahead of that whole curve and be one of the informed people now, so that when the hordes start, trying to figure out, where to turn to, you are a resource of information, and that's kind of the nature of leadership and all of that jazz, which Ben certainly is. And so I just want to say, recognize and applaud Ben for doing this room that Cheryl just kindly pinned to the top of the room, how home automation improves sustainability. Ben, I have to say, when you were doing the room yesterday, and I remember the title fondly because it was about how does camping kind of prepare you kind of mentally for this, which I have that same thought on a regular basis. Like, and this title as well is so spot on. You and I are now clearly living um, highly synergistic day-to-day experiences, because that thought also about home automation improving sustainability and the way that I manage my water system through automation here is so right on point. So I have to say I'm really super impressed with the concepts that how you're positioning these room titles. They
Oh,
clearly,
sorry, I didn't mean to unmute. Thanks, Tyler. Yeah, I'm just at the moment I'm just ad libbing them as they feel natural, and then a bit like the Bitcoin rooms I run, as we see patterns, we'll start to build them into kind of slightly more structured. But it's pretty cool.
yeah,
There's some amazing people coming into them. So yeah, and they're all recorded against my profile, so it's all cool.
yeah.
Thank you.
I'll give you my own personal super important example on how home automation improves sustainability. I have a deep well. It's 110 meters deep. That deep well takes a bit of energy, right? It's about 1 kilowatt of energy, which is pretty substantial. And so I run the deep well when my batteries get full every day. When my batteries get full, there's nothing, and I've got excess sun coming into my panels, coming into my system, into the inverter. The batteries are full. There's no point in pouring all of that water into those buckets that are already full. Okay, let's turn on something that requires a lot of energy. Turn on the deep well. So we run the deep well until the sun, goes down, and that's how we use our spillover extra energy. Because you could argue I have maybe too many panels or whatever. I don't think I do, but because on days with less sun, I want to have all those panels to capture all that sun. But on days that have a bit of sun, I run the deep well. The deep well pours water into a massive tank the size of a swimming pool. In fact, I have two of them, one the size of a pool, one far bigger than any swimming pool. And that's my water supply. By the way, when the mountain that I'm on isn't spitting water, which it now does year round, because we got too much rain happening year round here now. So I haven't needed to run the deep well because both tanks have been full all the time. But this is the kind of luxury situation you want to be in, where you're using this kind of automated system that's providing your resources. And oh, by the way, the automation turns on the sprinklers, which on the farm. So that requires no energy at all, by the way. So it's just a tiny little device that goes as a little valve.
Solenoid valve.
Yeah, it's just a valve between a water hose, and it just turns on and off, at a regular time each day, and waters the plants, and bada boom, bada bing. So, but it does. You need to have all this automated. Otherwise, you're going to be doing very manual labor all the time, like watering farms and shit, which you don't want to be doing. So,
Exactly. It's not about reinventing the wheel and becoming a
but
stone man or a caveman, but a Raspberry Pi can consume 5 watts of electricity, 10 watts of electricity, and make thousands of decisions for you every second about how to best allocate your resources. So, learning those sort of things, super valuable.
yeah, okay. So last, and this is a nice transition article from our non-tech topic today to our tech topic, and this is from Professor Osif. It says, shocking to read. The headline is, a UPS driver, that's a delivery driver in the U.S., dies after collapsing inside his delivery truck on a scorching California day. UPS driver Esteban Chavez died after being found passed out inside of his truck last month in June. He had just turned 24 years old the day before. So here's a 23-year-old. By the way, the guy looks fit as a fiddle, right? Running around, he's doing more exercise than most triathlons every day, right? UPS drivers are running around physically all day, moving boxes and running all day. They're burning thousands of calories per day. This guy's in incredible shape. right? 23 years old, dies due to the heat, ostensibly in his UPS van, which those things do get hotter than a fucking tinderbox. So um, crazy, unfortunate, but
Tyler, a little bit of information. Hydration level has to do with heat stroke. So if you have been running around and not hydrating well, even if you're not thirsty, drinking plenty of water more
yeah,
than usual would prevent this kind of incident.
yeah. As this
But
article
like
goes on, the article assumes that it was from heat stroke. Was that John trying to jump in? Who was jumping in there?
Erica. I was going to
Eric,
say
go
that it's about 80 degrees Celsius on the top of cars during sunny weather. And if it is very humid, that also can reduce your ability to perspire. So it can really sneak up on you if you're not careful.
true that. Okay, so thank you for that one, Professor Osif. And now we get to go into the big tech news headlines for today. Are you?
Tyler, one
Yes.
thing, it's amazing that like a mass shooting in the USA is not top news anymore. It's
Oh
just
my God,
something
you're
that
right.
happens.
You're
It's
so
something
right.
that happens every day.
I was afraid to share that. I was thinking about it, but I don't know.
You're so right. You're so right. So there was another mass shooting on the 4th of July. Today is the 5th, and it was. And this dude is a truly sinister piece of work. This guy, because the gunfire sounds like fireworks going off, and it's the 4th of July, and it was at a parade. So you have whole bunch of people lined up for a parade, and they're hearing gunfire go off. But this is the one moment of the year where you don't think it's gunfire necessarily, because there's fireworks going on all around you all the time. And it was caught on video, and even the people sitting right next to the gunfire going off, like really close, like really loud on camera, and they're not. Nobody's flinching, right? Until people stand up and start screaming and running, and everyone's like, "Why are they running away? Like, are the fireworks? Did somebody catch on fire?" And like, no, that ain't. Those aren't fireworks. That's somebody with an automatic, letting loose, 60 rounds in 10 seconds on the whole audience, on the whole crowd there.
Tyler,
Tyler, there
I was
there was
born. I was
actually
actually born in Highland Park,
Yeah.
and so I spent 13 years in Chicago, 13 years in Milwaukee. But I was born there, went to school there, and my dad used to take me to that parade. And I would sit on his shoulders. I sent you an email, back channel at the top of the call. But yeah, it was super super scary, super super scary. I had a lot of friends that were there, and I sent you an email from
Yeah.
one of my classmates from grade school who's very close. And yeah, they're coming after the family big time as they should. But anyway, just sent you a little blurb there.
I heard Annette's voice in it.
What's
yeah.
that?
I wanted to jump in because there was a shooting in Philadelphia as well
Yep.
yesterday. It hasn't been reported as much, but two police officers were shot during the fireworks as well in Philadelphia.
And the
And
sad
also
part,
the Danish
I try to,
mall.
sorry, just let me finish this thought. Yesterday, I kind of opened a room about it. So, because I'm so frustrated with this topic becoming politicized and moving around in circles, not being able to find any solution because just people uh, cannot. I don't know why they can't admit the fact the problem is so persistently plaguing our nation. We need to take some steps. And even yesterday for that discussion, I mean, I'm truly thankful. Many people contributed, but then I got so much bad back channel messages. People just really love their guns more than people. And I'm not saying that I have a stance in terms of gun ownership, Second Amendment, none of that. It was just like a discussion, but people just are vile and very hateful when this topic arises, and it makes it so difficult to find some solutions.
I wonder if it's summer related. I mean, also they have the Danish mall shooting, mass shooting, right? And so
Yeah.
there's, oh, this weekend was just terrible.
Yeah.
That I bet some of this is post-COVID trauma. People have been locked up for so long.
But why is that systemic here? I mean,
Yes,
everyone in the
No, the
world
United
around
can
the
States.
do
The
this.
globe.
United States. It's easy access to guns. Period.
Yeah, but we still have to do better about getting people help and families and the people around, just not labeling folks so they're just, unique or quirky, right? I live here in the Chicago area, so I've been seeing a lot of the very much local coverage. And I mean, this young man had some incredible visceral social media content, and it looked like he's been planning this maybe since September of last year. And then those around him, and even into high school, this poor young man was, um, um, a loner and whatnot. And so, what did he decide? He decided to take it out on everybody else. We've got to do better about identifying earlier, let alone with the gun laws. It has to be done together. Not one or the other will stop this. It's a number of solutions that have to come together. Thank you.
But and Tyler, if you not if you go through all these shooters, right, for this recent mass shooting, they're all pretty young, like 20 plus, early
Great
20s.
point. There certainly seems to be a
Cells.
bit of
Skin
a.
cells.
I
Yeah,
agree with Cheryl's point, which is there certainly seems to be a high correlation of young, dudes in their early 20s.
Yeah, a lot of FBI folks have been speaking, maybe former retired special agents, and they said after Columbine, definitely a profile was worked up, and there's no question, all these folks fit it. There, and so that's why I'm saying we've got to do better about not letting people get to this point. Besides better gun laws.
yeah. I mean, all the red flags were there with this young man, and they were out there in the public, and still nothing was picked up. And at the parade, there were dozens and dozens of armed police, and they couldn't stop him either. So that just throws out the argument of a good guy with a gun stops a bad guy with a gun. We really have to ban the assault weapons in the United States. That really, when Obama did that, or whoever it was, Clinton, that stopped it for a while, and now it's easy to get them.
Yeah, because this perpetrator was on the roof of a building on the parade route. So he was actually, I was a sniper. So he wasn't on the ground. He was above, and people didn't know even the direction of where these bullets were coming from. So some people, well, ran towards it, and they didn't know that because they couldn't tell. So it's everybody in the Chicago area, the state of Illinois, little in the country. We just have no words.
And we'll talk about this again. The same thing in a few weeks or a few days. Very sad.
Okay, so the
On
first, yeah, the first. Thank you for jumping in on that, Dr. Fran. The air horn needs to go, and then now the top tech news stories for today, July 5th, 2022. The first one comes from Reuters that EU lawmakers passed the Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act, seeking to regulate US tech giants, but enforcement could be hamstrung by limited resources. And the photo of this article is of Margaret Vestager from Denmark, who is kind of the poster person for the Europe's crackdown on big tech, as she's renowned to do, and she's on a mission. And this is where I remind everybody that I work in Sweden in tech, where I interface with the government quite regularly, in fact, almost daily. And indeed, for many years now, they've been dreaming of this moment for many, many years, which is how can we regulate American tech to open a bit of space for domestic European unicorns to become, I don't know, whatever the megacorns or dinosaur or whatever Pegasus is or whatever you want to call the FANG group, the Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Google, what have you. So Microsoft. So why isn't there a European company in the exclusive ranks of FANG, or pick whatever anagram you want to use there for the top five tech companies? So I don't mean to oversimplify it all, but I've had enough of those conversations to kind of pave a very simplified narrative there. But now here it is. The day of reckoning has arrived. And so, what do the bills say? In addition to the rules known as the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act, which require online platforms to do more to police the intent for illegal content, companies face fines of up to 10% of annual global turnover. That's a shit ton of money, y'all. That's billions of dollars for violations and breaches. Lawmakers and boy, I bet they are just licking their chops, praying that these companies fuck up so that they can penalize them for tens of billions of dollars. Lawmakers in EU states had reached a political deal on both sets of rules earlier this year, leaving some details to be ironed out. The two rule books for big tech, built on EU antitrust chief Margaret Vestager's experiences with investigations into the companies. She has set up a DMA task force, so that's how it's going to be handled, with about 80 officials expected to join up, which critics say is inadequate. You're going to need a lot more than 80 people to go after
Yeah.
all of that. Lawmaker Andreas Schwab, who steered the issues through the European Parliament, has called for a bigger task force to counter big tech's deep pockets. We're going to need more people to help us remove and transfer all of those billions of dollars from big tech's bank accounts into our government bank accounts.
And
Yeah.
Tyler,
I just want to.
how long do you think it's going to be before, particularly with a draconian, global penalty based on your worldwide sales, before the American tech companies argue that it's a violation of,
Right,
WTC rules, and therefore, they'll go back to the American government and ask for retaliatory tariffs because
right,
that's going to happen.
right.
Protectionism is sexy again.
Yeah. It's the bananas all over again.
The world was flat.
But I don't know whether this is an apt comparison, but didn't this happen with food and drugs about like 50 years ago, where the American Food and Drug Administration was like, or should I say, the globalization of American food was just different than the what we have in the EU? Or is that just like me thinking about it too much? But I just think like the rules over here is just wildly different. So I'm guessing that's just happening in tech separately because of the way that
Well,
data
you
works and
bring up
all
a
of
good
these
point,
things.
Demler. I mean, if I'm correctly addressing your point, how it shook down, in the what was that, the 30s and 40s, and where the banana farmers in south of the border, in South and Central America, more South America, were, as soon as the South American countries, I think it was Bolivia, most notably, decided, you know what, we don't like you American massive companies, having too much power here, and with all of this banana business. So we're gonna, give land back, and the banana companies went to Uncle Sam and said, "Hey, Uncle Sam, they're fucking with our business." And Uncle Sam sent down the squad to take care of business and replace the government. So ostensibly, that's over a vast oversimplification, of course, but the question remains: wouldn't ostensibly something like that happen in this case? Meaning, the American tech companies, like the banana companies, are now going to run back to the American government, as Ken just said, and said, "Hey, Daddy, that mean European, that French guy over there with the beret called me a bad name, and they don't like me, and they're making trouble for us, and they're going to kill our business." And then
We go all Guatemala on them
Yeah.
and
Oh,
deliver freedom.
I think
right, we're going to have to go
I just
replace
came up with.
those Europeans, about that. But I
Show
think
them
it's
what we
going
did to the bananas.
I
to
was reminded of a more apt comparison, right? With the cars. So American, when you named South America, that happened with the car companies as well, where they were doing a mass import, and then basically Brazil didn't want that, and then they were giving high tariffs to the American companies, and giving subsidies to the Brazilian companies, but it kind of messed up with the Brazilian economy back then because the Americans didn't want that. So, and it also happened in Europe, but particularly in Brazil because they basically became bankrupt because of all of the subsidies they gave to the American companies and then taking them away.
Only America's allowed to do this sort of shit. Only America.
I would
Tyler,
love to. Yeah,
Could you imagine a situation that that Zuckerberg calls Sundar and says, you know what, they don't like us so much. Why don't we shut down Android and Apple together for like a couple of days and see how they like living with no Android and no Apple because
They
they
should
want us to have
totally
some.
do that because after a few days, every single entrepreneur who's ever wanted to launch a cell phone company, a software company, anything, all of a sudden has a new market that they didn't have before that they would have never had an option for.
Nokia had a head start. Where are they, by the way?
Exactly.
But
They
they had.
they they laid they got Microsoft with Stephen Elop, who wrote the Burning Platforms memo. For people that are less familiar with this incident in technology, this is actually one of the more influential things a lot of people don't know about. This was how a leading market share company that owned the cell phone industry, like they literally had, it was like a 60-70% market lock. Like it was insane. The nearest one was like 10-20% behind them. It was like they had almost a complete monopoly, and the phones were great. They lasted forever. And then something went wrong. They're about to make the transition to the smartphone industry with the Migo, and they're about to essentially, it was going to be great. It was going to be open source based, Linux based. It was going to be fantastic. And then they got a Microsoft executive. And there's been some inquests afterwards about what happened after all this mess because the Microsoft ended up acquiring them for a song and a prayer. And there's some national inquiries going, did we just get like economic espionage, like sabotaged? Because we kind of like that company with things. Yeah, just look up Stephen Elop,
Yeah,
Burning Platforms
but
memo.
Chris, Microsoft tried its own operating system in cell phones too, and it didn't work.
Sure.
I'd actually argue to you that Nokia in part lost its market share because their phones looked like a Volvo, and Apple built a phone that looks like a Lamborghini, and people bought style.
They were ahead of Apple by 4 years on with their internal stuff on that. The thing is that at that time it was purely about the radio suddenly became cheap. That was a core technology essentially that wasn't before, because before to make a portable cell phone you have a big bulky thing because the oscillators were so expensive for the crystals that you need to have a large power unit to power that thing. So it wasn't just that they were unsexy. It was that they also required a lot of power to keep these things going, and that's a relatively short range. One of the key technological breakthroughs that allows modern cell phone communications to work is having a small oscillator that essentially can be made with semiconductor fabrication processes. So rather than being a hand-tuned crystal that you're physically chopping off things for, and each one of these chips would cost like 10-20 bucks, take a huge amount of power to power. This went to something that's about like 10-20 cents worth of chip components, and it requires almost no power to transmit a long range signal. That was a huge breakthrough. Once that was enabled, all of a sudden it's who can figure out how to package this first. Motorola had a lot of the early patents. Nokia had a lot of that. A lot of those nowadays are tied to frame patents, Qualcomm, etc. But anyways, I get a little off track. But anyways, just key event with this. Nokia had a lead. They bungled it, and part of that was essentially who they put into leadership. It's a fascinating tale in tech, and it could have turned out very differently. But if they got their cell phones cut off in Europe, they would be thrilled. Well, they'd be angry for a month or two, but they'd be thrilled because it gives them an opportunity to finally compete
They'd
back in
only
the
cut
market
them off
lines.
for a week. That was my point. You'll see how fast all of a sudden there'll be a cry for a political change if they got cut off for a week.
It'll be chaos, absolute chaos. GDPs will nosedive all over that. I think we'll have each other's heads. But for the entrepreneurs that want to launch competitors, all of a sudden they have a market.
okay,
Well,
so
then no one's going to launch anything unless they think it's going to be a longer. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying they do it for a week, and all of a sudden the politics will change. Real fast. And Tyler, I had a question for you, by the way. Hasn't there been enough devastation in the financial markets and tech companies that maybe we shouldn't be measuring tech companies by being unicorns, but maybe by the quality of their products or something, as opposed to what idiot valuations that somebody gives a company? Because I'm just saying.
Prep
Here,
soon.
here.
But isn't that like the American myth of being a millionaire and the good life and stuff? It was based upon the American standard and not necessarily another standard that probably should have been put in place.
I
The
think
unicorn, yeah. I mean, we're certainly guilty. I'm not blaming foreigners for the unicorn thing. Tyler's an American, by the way. He's the one who uses the term all the time.
an American in Thailand.
yeah,
I use the
so
term a lot as well. Yeah.
the article about the DMA says the DMA and the DSA. The DMA is set to force changes in big tech companies, businesses, requiring them to make their messaging services interoperable. That's fantastic, by the way.
Woo!
Yeah, that's the major one that I was looking at. Just the way that I like
And
about think
and
about
now
Europe for stuff.
and this next requirement is what scares the shit out of them. It requires them to provide business users access to their data. Business users will be able to promote competing products and services on the platforms and reach deals with customers of the platforms.
Is this European regulation? Who passed this one?
Yeah, Europe. Yeah, companies will not
I
be
like a dream essentially for USA versions of this regulation.
companies will not be allowed to favor their own services over rivals or prevent users from removing pre-installed software or apps.
It's
Two
almost
rules.
quaint, but Microsoft literally got antitrust over daring to put Internet Explorer as a default browser, and how dare they?
Yeah,
How times have changed.
it says from removing pre-installed software or apps. Two rules that will hit Google and Apple. Notably, the DSA bans targeted advertising aimed at children or based on sensitive data. Okay, now that should scare the shit out of Facebook, and that's why, not surprisingly, at the top of the room, I just pinned an article from Barron's, and the headline reads: Mark Zuckerberg issues dire economic warning to Meta employees because he has insiders over there at the EU who told him this thing's going to
He
pass.
paid a lot for them.
So he knew 4 days ago this thing was going to pass because anyone roaming the halls of the parliaments or whatever, they already know how if things are going to pass. And that's
Six
by
hundred grand for AI researchers. They're going to essentially have to have a little dry up a little bit.
I'm just saying, like if you actually work in Congress or you have a spouse or a sibling that does, they know how the votes are going to pan out. 24 hours before the votes happen. There's a sentiment analysis that goes around, and they've been debating this in the hallways for weeks, often months, and they have a good sense for how these votes are going to pan out, and that's what gives them an unfair advantage in the stock market. By the way, because some of these rulings, like this one passing, is likely to cause downward pressure on big tech companies. Because, as by the way, let's go see if Mark Zuckerberg sold half of his holdings in Facebook in the past 24 hours. Because he, in the Barron's article that I just pinned to the top of the room, says to Facebook employees, he issued a chilling message to Meta platform employees. The company faces one of the worst downturns that we've seen in recent history. That would necessitate a scaling back in hires and resources. The dire economic warning was delivered during an internal video conference meeting on Thursday for Meta's 77,800 workers, so nearly 80,000, by the way. According to a New York Times report, to underscore the ominous message, Zuckerberg told employees to expect to do more with fewer resources and that their performance would be more intensely graded. Quote, I think some of you might decide that this place isn't for you, and that self-selection is okay with me.
Run, run!
Is he
uh,
learning from Elon Musk?
quote,
They,
quote,
they stuck around for
realistically,
the loyalty for Cambridge Analytica. They stuck around for the January 6th. They stuck around where ethics has no issue with things. But when you go for the paycheck, oh man, the good people leave. And then they're only left with what, I guess? I don't know.
follow on quote here, realistically, there are probably a bunch of people at the company who shouldn't be here.
Someone take a
Now,
look at the spreadsheets.
I
I've
want
heard
to
that before.
I want to use Mark's quote as I want to enter that into the record, Your Honor, as evidence that all the big tech companies, I've been ranting about this for, I don't know, a month now. Have I not made it abundantly clear my point that all the big tech companies want to lay off 10% of their people? That this is the opportunity to do it. Normally, if you tried to do something like this, it would be a huge brouhaha. You would be singled out. But because everyone's doing it at the same time, now's your moment, your opportunity, your golden opportunity to lay off your weak 10%, which every company has, as Mark is clear, and Mark's not wrong.
But
Everybody
it's
knows
not the
it.
weak that leave. It's the strong. It's the people that have options. Those are the guys that actually jump ship because they can see this stuff. The people that don't have any options, they're holding on for dear life.
I'm also interested in knowing how many jobs are replaced by AI and robots.
Workplace automation. Well, that's actually a really good point. When they say 80,000, like that one thing that tech companies have gone away for years is when they have like their price to earning ratios, et cetera. One of the ways you can play with the numbers game is say, oh, this is our company proper, our subcontractors are elsewhere, and that's somewhere different. You can play the same game saying your labor productivity or how much you make per employee, which can make look great for consultant sheets. It's also complete lies because what happens is they have huge numbers of people in Bangladesh and click farm workers in third world countries or in suburbs of rural America making $2.13 an hour, or 30 cents an hour depending on your demographic. Literally just clicking on yes, that's a dog, yes, that's a cat, yes, that's an ad, no, that's not an ad, yes, that's an insurrectionist, no, that's not, that person said a mean thing, that person did say a mean thing, yes, that's a beheading, no, that's not a beheading. Just training an AI, but providing that training set for the data set for the AI is extraordinarily labor intensive, and tech companies are fantastic at obscuring that labor source. So what I see to be really interesting here is this is the part that we're hearing about now, and this is the like the proper employees, the AI coders, the people who get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year because those are important people. But the people that have the wrong color skin in the wrong part of the world that are doing arguably more actual work on those data training sets. When you hear OpenAI and all these other things, and you say, "Wow, that's an amazing AI! Look at all those amazing algorithms." When you actually look at how they work, the only reason they work is because they have more training data. There was more money thrown at them. So arguably, it's purely a labor thing. It's they say we've got more compute power. Yeah, but the training data set is the key part. This is a labor issue. It's not necessarily a tech issue. What's interesting is that the who gets laid off. This probably has already been happening for a few months. It's just in places that we don't hear about that aren't, actively paying for ads on the newspapers and such. And those third world country click farm workers, that could actually be a fairly substantial thing in other economies. If we want to dig deeper into this to actually find out how many, Google, I think, it was something ridiculous when you compared essentially their ratio of proper employees to third world. People that are doing minimum, not minimum wage, is actually an improvement. They're actually far below. It'd be interesting to compare what the economic effects are globally in other areas compared to this, and we might actually use it actually a proxy for which companies are actually just doing it as a temporary measure, and which ones are planning for long-term structural readjustment. Anyways, I'm done with my point here, but it's some interesting things.
Okay, so the next topic is that according to sources, Sequoia, which is one of the very top VC firms, Sequoia Capital in China is about to raise a $9 billion fund. That's a very large fund for a VC fund. VC funds, even a billion is incredibly respectable, by the way. So for $9
And this
billion,
goes into a separate pool from Palantir doing domestic USA, InQtel style stuff. That's the China fund for Sequoia. They're completely different.
correct. Yeah, this is specifically their China fund for China. And the context is that China's kind of had a sky is falling scenario going on with tech for a year now. And so,
Arresting your leaders will do that to you.
right, but yeah, that too. But Sequoia is rather prescient and has incredible good track record of kind of seeing over the horizon as to where the ball's moving. And so, them raising a $9 billion fund for China is sort of a counter trend move that has caught a lot of people's attention. So it says it's the largest amount raised by a single China-focused VC firm, higher than its original target of $8 billion. So there you go. Next up, from the Financial Times, they say they have sources that TikTok abandons its plans to expand its TikTok Shop live e-commerce tools to Europe and the US, following internal problems and a lack of traction. Chinese-owned social media platform's foray into live stream shopping in the UK has struggled to gain traction. And now that I'm stuttering because that's the most embarrassing headline I've ever had to read in tech news around
TikTok
the world.
fails to gain traction.
No, that social commerce isn't happening. They're retracting. However, it does say, in my defense, amid internal problems, which could be code for the revelation that TikTok was leaking data back to Beijing. That happened last week. And so maybe now is not the right time for TikTok to be scaling up a massive effort like social commerce when there's now rumblings that TikTok should be banned outright. There's a very significant talk of banning TikTok in the U.S. I don't know what's
Why not
happening.
just give them to Oracle? That's the same difference, right?
Right, that's an even faster, more efficient form of. Yeah.
They so buried in lawyers and
Right. So the Chinese-owned company venture called TikTok Shop was launched in the UK last year. Its first market outside of Asia. Brands and influencers broadcast live and sell products through a clickable orange basket on the screen of the viral short video app. Live stream commerce is seen as the future of shopping by social media platforms. They take a commission on sales, with rivals YouTube and Instagram developing similar features in Europe. The model has proved lucrative for TikTok parent ByteDance, which has seen sales on Chinese sister app more than triple year on year. It's 300% growth year on year is incredible. Selling more than selling more than 10 billion products, not $10 billion of products, 10 billion products. That's probably 100. $10 each. You're talking 100 billion.
that's got to be a typo. That's literally a single product for every person on Earth. That's unique. That doesn't
That's a lot of
that seems a
hamburgers.
little.
That's a lot of
That
hamburgers.
probably mean 10 million. Typos happen.
TikTok had planned to launch the feature in Germany, France, Italy, and Spain in the first half of the year before expanding to the US later in 2022. Like right now, we're just entering the second half of 2022. According to several people briefed on the matter, but the expansion plans have been dropped after the UK project failed to meet targets and influencers dropped out of the scheme. Well, now it says, quote, the market just isn't there yet. A TikTok employee said, quote, general consumer awareness and adoption are still low and nascent. Many TikTok shop live streams have achieved poor sales despite the company offering subsidies and cash incentives to encourage brands and influencers to sell through the app. The Financial Times investigation last month revealed that there had been a mass staff exodus from the company's e-commerce team in London, who complained of an aggressive working culture encouraged by. This was the point I was just about to get into, which was we read about 2 or 3 articles in the past 2 or 3 months about, 2 or 3 weeks, that TikTok's e-commerce team in London, which was being run by some Chinese dude in London,
Are willing to talk to media.
that they were being harassed and that this guy's an ass, and they kind of all walked out on him. That was the gist of the headlines that we read in recent weeks. And so them shutting down their TikTok shops, well, that the people who just left in recent days were the people who were responsible for building that product. So maybe you kind of that's a natural consequence of your team walking out, that you kind of have to shut down that product or project. That could cost them very, 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 very dearly, by the way. If Instagram and YouTube and the others continue to develop social commerce in Europe at a time when TikTok's team has walked out, there you go. So it says after the revelations. It says a Financial Times investigation last month revealed that there had been a mass staff exodus from the company's e-commerce team in London, who complained of an aggressive working culture enforced by the company's Chinese leadership. After the revelations, Joshua Ma, a senior ByteDance executive who ran TikTok Shop in Europe, was replaced. Well, there you go. The team that was supposed to build this fell apart. So of course they want to blame it on lack of market or whatever. Well, if that's true, then we will see YouTube and Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and everybody also stopping it. But I can guarantee you they won't. As the company investigated comments made to London staff that he didn't believe in maternity leave.
Ooh, that's going to cause some Europeans to be grumpy.
Well,
Wait, does Britain still count as being European, or are we some Jerseyville on that one?
Talk about foot and mouth syndrome.
Britain has one of the most applaudable,
They got the NIH.
a very applaudable
NIH NHS.
maternity leave programs. So that's not something that you, as a Chinese boss, want to be telling your English staff. That I can't.
Yeah,
Well,
he
just imagine
forgot
how
he
it's
is
for the
talking to
Chinese
Brit.
staff. They're like, work harder, work harder, work harder, and it's like, well, the London guys, they're on vacation with stuff, and it's like, what's vacation? We've got a product to launch. Sorry, to interrupt you, BB.
Yeah, I mean, Joshua Ma, he's just get used to this 996 culture. So,
Right.
and yeah, in China, it's like for maybe daily people, the workers never ever, challenge him at all. So,
Right. Well, this is just a classic.
Worker rights? What are those?
Right. And me not being able to say things that upset, the opposite sex. I go, this is just a kind of. There were other articles about how Alibaba was facing lawsuits because of locker room type talk that was rather common in Asia, and it is. I mean, maybe Cheryl or Bibi or Tomoko's not with us today, but as I think everyone who's ever been here more than a minute knows how fond I am of Japan. But in Japan, you'll hear things that you would not be allowed to, that no one would dare say in the West, in Europe or in the
HR
US.
would get grumpy.
Yes, a lot of heads would be rolling, and in Japan specifically, and my point is in China as well, and in fact, even in Thailand where I am, people are not as upset by such comments. So this guy made a comment that he thought he could make, there's very severe consequences for making comments like that in Europe or in the UK or in the US, and there's no consequences for talking like that in Asia generally. So here we are. It's a bit of a culture clash, kind of thing. And quote, it says the product was recently launched in Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam. By the way, that's 10. That's 100, 200, 250 million people right there in those three. That's a U.S. size launch right there, and has been available in Indonesia since last year. Well, there's the one of the third or fourth biggest country in the world by population right there. So it's happening massively. Quote, we are always looking at ways to enhance our community's experience and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, well, enough with the PR talk. You had a bonehead Chinese dude who didn't know Western culture and came over and, had a nice taste of his shoe. And amazing how I imagine it's more than one isolated comment or incident that led for the walkout. But boy, that could be very costly. Uh, so there you go. TikTok dropping the
Tyler,
ball.
I have a question, right? So TikTok is kind of because of the success in China, right, of the live social commerce. Well, TikTok is considered the early mover for live social commerce, right, in the rest of the world outside China. So the rest, like YouTube and Instagram, they follow TikTok, right, to want to implement this. I guess the winner of all this thing is actually Shopify, right? Who actually got
Yeah,
their
I agree with that.
the kind of
Yeah.
partnership, and also that's the reason why you kind of double down on Shopify, right? So do
Correct.
you see that there will be an impact like in the days to come
Impact of what?
on Shopify because TikTok is the first one to come into this social commerce thing, and then the rest follow suit. Right now, TikTok is saying that they are not going to continue doing this. So do you think that YouTube and Instagram will be facing all those roadblocks soon?
No, I just said I can
Yeah, I know,
guarantee
I
that
know.
they're not going to be
Cultural
stopped.
difference you mentioned, yes.
Yeah,
But we'll see, we'll see.
yeah. Of course we'll see. But it's too lucrative for the American companies to not do it, and TikTok needs to be very uh, defense, kind of shift its posture from offensive to defensive mode at the moment because it's facing potential bans outright at the moment. There's chatter of banning TikTok wholesale.
I mean,
So
national security risk trumps economics. I mean, when you get to a certain point where you get like saying, well, you don't have a democracy, you don't have the ability to set your own borders, and oh, by the way, if you leave something on long enough, literally your legislators will have their entire careers depending on this. I mean, when you're looking at the long term consequences of that, it's one thing when it's a friendly thing where it's like, hey, America, remember the Marshall Plan type kind of thing. So everything when it's China going and saying, "Hi, yeah, we'd rather essentially remake the world in a very, very different pattern," and that not always compatible with the human rights concept. That's sort of that elicits a much stronger appeal. And we're seeing with TikTok, but that's an easier one to ban because they've been so egregious. How even if it's more addictive for the kids and et cetera. But when you look at the longer term implications of, well, once you're comfortable doing that, once you've successfully done so and you didn't take too much of a hit economically, et cetera, you start replicating it through the full stack of essentially going, was this made here, was this not? And now we're going from the free trade, let's all essentially have everyone specialized and let's be friends and everyone trades everything, to a very protectionist defensive mechanism, because just as a matter of saying we'd like to essentially continue having a nation state. And that's the lens that's going to get framed as, not as a, oh, we might have essentially a little bit of economic competition here or there. It's going to be framed on a national security basis.
I
Yes,
have
and
another
also as
question, Tyler.
psychological impact it caused. And Cheryl, I have a question about the Shopify comment you made. I did not understand how the Shopify is the winner. I don't know
Oh,
enough
Tyler
about.
will know.
What's the question?
Uh,
No, he's talking about Shopify. Why is it that Shopify is benefiting from all these
They,
platforms going into live social media? So you have to explain to her.
uh,
because
She doesn't.
they enable it.
Yep. Yeah, the Amber. They partner with Shopify to enable that shopping experience. My question is, Tyler, could this also be the style of shopping, the difference between Asian and the Western world? Because you know that most travelers around the world usually, I mean, it's usually the Asians who are doing a lot of impulsive shopping, right? When they go traveling, they buy a lot. Could it be because Westerners are not that used to impulsive shopping? That
or
when
it's
you
just
look
a
at the
different
live
kind of
commerce, you'll buy immediately.
impulsiveness.
Oh, Westerners are
When
very
you,
impulsive
yeah,
shopping.
it depends on what you mean by impulsive, I guess.
Uh-huh. No,
Right.
because whenever I go traveling, right, even in the European countries or in US, it's always the Asian who are buying because everything for them is so cheap, right? So I'm not sure. This is just my own
You
experience,
kind of
but
answer your
I
own
think,
may
question
not
right
be true.
there.
yeah, I think
You've got a
maybe
massive
for
and growing middle
Western.
class
Aren't
with the.
we addicted to all the sales that happened around different holidays? And we have plenty of opportunities to shop locally that it's not a
Yeah.
big deal to travel outside.
Okay,
Yeah.
middle class is growing exponentially in a lot of these Asian markets. The other thing about this is that they have stable, essentially either social patterns or
Mm-hmm.
stable food supplies as a thing. America has an enormous amount of wealth, and that's true. However, the social safety net is near non-existent. Not just non-existent, it's disappearing. So the thing is that for people that essentially going, oh crap, how am I going to essentially cover next month's bills? I think it was like 40-50% can't cover next month guaranteed, and so it's like it's paycheck to paycheck type kind of thing. Under that sort of framework, splurging a bunch of money on a shopping spree is something you do have extreme guilt, or going, oh shoot, I
Mm.
can't do this, so that you go to like an affirm payment or something. Where in Asia, it's a, hey, look at this, I now have, our family has so much more wealth than we had earlier. We have all of our basics covered, and look, we have extra to play with. We could upgrade our living standards by buying something and making our quality of life better. That is a very different psychological mindset with things, and it's something of like, traveling in China, it feels like they're almost like in the 1950s for USA, where it's like there's just advertisements for everything. No one quite knows what to buy, but there's just so much of it. Just try a little bit of everything. It's kind of crazy, wild, experimental. That's a very different psychology from USA, where it's like
Right.
But
where
Chris,
we have to maintain
despite,
illusions of
despite
prosperity.
the lack of monetary funds, people use layover here. They use their credit cards and still purchase, even if they cannot afford it.
That will work for a certain point, but that's a temporary boost. It doesn't last very long. We're already essentially maxed on student debt for, just being able to maintain like baseline. You have to maintain a car just for commute to work. So I mean, like the baseline of credit is already pretty like it's pretty slim to begin with. It's less about conspicuous consumption at this point. It's more about just being able to even maintain like existence. When you have people essentially that aren't able to afford housing, the idea of consumer products on top of that, aside from a communications device, which arguably now it's not possible to live without a communications device. Most functions of government, civic involvement, etc., commerce, you can't do without the communications technology. So at this point, essentially, the baseline has moved so far that maintaining standards is very, very, very different. Our culture takes a little bit of time to catch up to reality, and that's the thing that's being realigned right now.
Is there another psychological development in China or Asian nations, like a nouveau riche mentality? Whenever you get like newfound richness, you try to show off, you try to purchase more than
Yeah,
you
yeah,
could afford,
yeah,
right? And
yes.
in America, even though the GDP is way higher, I mean, still we have huge differences in terms of GDP from rest of the world. People are becoming mindful, perhaps, and then there are those trends of minimalism. People are trying to be conscious and mindful of their purchases and shifting their lifestyles. So there are different trends affecting.
It's not about consumer choice, though. We are so far past that. This is pure economics at this point. You already had the Fed essentially coming out and saying unemployment isn't high enough. Our labor is too expensive. That essentially goes into and I'm getting a little bit outside my field of direct expertise on this, but when the Fed is saying that, what they're saying is the economy needs to be adjusted because our international trade is not reflecting our domestic, essentially how we're pricing things. So this is weird because in America we're used to essentially politicians promising jobs and to lower unemployment. Now you have the Feds coming out and saying the exact opposite. Part of that realignment of reality that is occurring right now is that adjustment. And that's really important to consider because the messaging about whether or not that's a personal responsibility thing has nothing to do with that. Every single person, when inflation goes up, every single person that doesn't have assets is essentially penalized instantly for that. It works as a sort of stealth tax, and that happens across the entire society. So people with the same budgetary habits, the same lifestyle behaviors, etc., will suddenly not be able to buy as much food at the store. These sorts of policies are set in macro; they're not in micro, and this is the thing that's happening when you're seeing difference in psychology between China and USA. This can be explained almost entirely by macroeconomics. Now, the individual psychology is kind of interesting, but that's not the factor that's playing in here.
And just to add a little bit about Aaron's point, yes, because like China, since the economic reform from 1979, Deng Xiaoping 时期, the period that makes
Dang.
it open to the Western market. So in 2010, that China replaced Japan as the second biggest economic entity in the world. So just like you said, at certain times, people were so poor and become suddenly overnight, not overnight, but that in a sense, it's like all the wealth coming so soon. So, and along with that, because of the tariff thing, so the luxuries sold in China, the price is super high. So when they go to the European, we all know the news that the store like maybe Gucci, maybe the Chanel, all the luxury stores in Europe were filled with the Chinese. Prior to the pandemic, we all know that. So just like that, that is a kind sense of FOMO in China for Chinese people. You need to have a bag, especially women. You need a bag to say you're rich. But I think right now these kind of trends has increased a little bit. Just like Chris said, the economy that has the steps in its system. So, but right now, I think another point that Cheryl will point out is that from my perspective, I think the Western try to enjoy the journey itself, and for Asians, a lot of us we try to buy things, local things, and enjoy the shopping itself. So let us a little bit of this cultural difference here.
That is true.
That,
One
that's
just
again,
very quick. Just
sorry,
a very quick
Chris,
point. The cultures change over time. That's the only thing I want to say.
psychologically, it's like a nouveau riche mentality where you buy stuff as opposed to people with old money who buy experiences. So they focus more on making memories and experiencing that wealth instead of social indicators of their wealth.
Yeah, that's like 700 million Chinese people left poverty in the last few decades. So they're quite literally at the
It's
stage where most
astounding.
Americans were a few decades ago. But also, there's something else to keep in mind that the Chinese undervalue their currency. They purposefully suppress it something like 40%. So that means that the Chinese people have better, perhaps, purchasing power overseas. So that might explain that anomaly.
No, they overseas can be worse there because their currencies artificially weak.
It's the opposite. They essentially means that it boosts domestic supply. So they can
Right.
buy everything domestically much cheaper. So that's a
Right.
So then,
huge
why would
boost to
they buy?
manufacturing.
Why would they buy overseas? Then why would they buy luxury goods? Are the luxury
That's the
Right.
goods
signal
then still
social
Tariff,
priced?
the
status.
tariff thing.
They go to Hong Kong because they don't pay taxes on the luxury goods in Hong Kong.
Oh,
And
okay.
there's another
And
reason
Correct.
because they are worried about fake goods in their own country.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
even
that's
though
the
it's made on the
reason.
Fact.
Yeah.
same manufacturing lines, which is funny. Like, which one's actually authentic?
I'll tell you. I mean, I'm with a bit of embarrassment when in Shenzhen, immediately when you cross the border from Hong Kong into Shenzhen, there's a very large building for fashion right at the edge of the train station. Yeah, Lohui, and they sell Tom Ford sunglasses that are real, absolutely in every way real. I have the real ones, and I walk over there and I compare them side by side. And I have the Tumi backpack that's like $400, and they sell the identical bag for $35, and the same sunglasses that are $250 for about $10. And I'm telling when I tell you they're identical, I mean they're fucking identical. I mean they're not selling like copycats. They're like made on the same line. And you're talking to somebody who had a clothing company who watched over the manufacturing of my goods very meticulously, and I understand, the particular thread that they use. You look at the stitching and the actual thread in the actual stitching. The zipper, is it the actual same zipper or a copy of the zipper? No, we're talking the same hardware. Top to bottom,
Yeah,
inside out.
you
When
product
we're talking luxury,
minor
there's
minor
sorry, go on.
issues, minor defects, or they are from previous season.
No,
I,
it's usually
I,
the
They
same
Well,
could
there
part.
are
say
several.
factory reject. Factory reject.
they could be
Yes,
factory
check
rejects.
or past season, Tyler. So you're not staying up to date with the trends.
No, they're
No,
still
no,
saying to me back that's being sold in the airports.
I'm kidding.
Yeah.
So
Anyway,
looking at the prices for Gucci though, I'm looking at it for $2,890 effectively USD for a pair of Tian Boston Supreme. Whereas in China, if you convert the currency, it's about $2,600. Whereas in France, it's 2,553. UK, it's 2,577. So they slightly get a small discount. This is what I was
it's more that
suggesting.
the factory has a separate line where essentially they have the ones that go to overseas markets and they have the ones
correct.
that are
Yeah,
sold domestically.
the
Bangladesh is the
quality
same
is
thing.
different. The designs are different. I know for sure because the quality we get here is different from France and different from Dubai. And even the pieces are curated, especially catering to the market. So the colors available in China won't be available here.
If they're selling it like above board, the thing is that part of the marketing strategy is one to essentially have the maximum amount that essentially signals that to the elites and whatever group they're selling it to, saying you can afford this, while everyone else essentially doesn't have that or doesn't have the latest version or something. And so it's a social status signaler. The quality part of it is going to be whatever the market can bear. What's interesting about this is that if you're looking at like, but for China specifically, just China, not overseas, just China, it's the same factory line. It's the same place that these things get made. What's interesting if when you consider the larger implications of how much of the cost of things actually are versus essentially how much we're paying for the design, branding, etc., there is a theoretical option where you could just make everything as a luxury product to that level of quality and it's just for everyone. The problem is if you actually do that, you no longer have social status signaling goods and you need to essentially invent new ones. And then you're back to square one on things. But like it is an interesting exercise of going, why do we make things that appear cheap or why do we think that appear expensive when the same manufacturing technologies are not actually all that big a difference on the price point? Those are more of social signalers, not the actual like quality of the fabrics and such.
Okay, so on the topic of currency exchange rates, there's actually two other related headlines happening at the moment. One is that the euro is at its lowest point since 2002 versus the dollar. So basically at parity, it's like the dollar and the euro are one to one at the moment, and which is fantastic if you're an American over in Europe at the moment. And then Turkey, here's a new headline that just came out. Turkey embraces Bitcoin as inflation hits 24-year high, which
They've
means,
joined El Salvador.
Ooh,
well, let's see. Inflation has hit its highest level in 24 years, standing at 78%, according to
Good
Turkish.
frack.
Yeah, well,
Did Russia give them a punishment or something?
no, I mean they were all the currency was already somewhat collapsing due to sort of corruption
Uh,
related issues in Turkey over the past
It's got
several
some
months.
beautiful construction projects. It's got some. It's they've got monuments and all these amazing construction projects. As far as I can see, I wonder if how many of those were based on 30 years of growth projections that they had and they took on financing for loans. Maybe I don't know. Like it's probably they've got some pretty stuff though there.
Yeah, Turkey's fantastic, by the way. But it says Turkey's annual inflation rate hit 78%. The Turkish lira has been losing its power, and as such, citizens have been turning to crypto. Bitcoin volume has increased significantly in Q1 and Q2 compared to Q4 just of the previous year. So it's up for the first half of this year, despite deposit. Oh, Turkey's inflation rate. Yeah. So more people are turning to Bitcoin in. That's a sort of natural social anthropology phenomena is when people lose faith in their fiat currency of their country, they will likely turn to something like Bitcoin. So these are interesting things to watch closely. And indeed, Turkey was already an absolute bargain of a place to be vacationing over the past recent months, and now more than ever. Um, Anywho,
So
Hey,
Turkey is
Tyler,
actually good for holding Bitcoin, but they actually banned crypto payments a few months back, right? They banned crypto payments, but I guess
Turkey
it's
did.
okay to hold it.
I don't know the details of their
Yep, I will
regulations.
pin an article on top.
Okay,
I mean, just in case anybody go Turkey for holiday, don't expect to use crypto for payment.
right.
Yeah,
Fair,
that's
fair,
just yeah,
fair
it's
enough.
just
hey Tyler.
Yeah,
I mean, if I don't want to be, but I guess we're like 30 minutes into this show now. That I think actually, I just wanted to point out that what I think is probably the biggest pure tech story
yeah.
I mean, when I tweeted out to you, I guess, it always ends up in the bottom of the barrel because of my time zone. You haven't covered yet. I just wanted to mention because it's a pure tech story. We're not going to talk about fashion. It's not about fashion or currencies. But the Wall Street Journal has a major story that the chip boom is losing steam on slowing PC sales and the crypto route, because the
Right,
crypto miners don't have much technology. And it
It's
says
right.
fantastic.
Yeah,
Intel and NVIDIA are among semiconductor makers warning of rockier times ahead after 2 years of surging demand. That's just the headline. It's a big story in the Wall Street Journal, and I sent it to you yesterday, actually.
yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know if you want to talk
Makes the
about that.
content
That's
Can
creators
I?
happy.
Yeah, can I just say my own personal story with that is that I've been looking to buy a PC, a big PC for some time now, and there's no GeForce, NVIDIA, like basically graphic drivers, GPUs, and now for some reason they're all over the market for cheap. So it's actually interesting to hear Ken say that headline right now.
The
Right.
gamers can finally play with ray tracing in nice
Yay!
Exactly,
settings.
yeah, because the
That and build
miners have been
content.
using the GPUs for some time now, so it's interesting to see hear that
Every
as well.
video on YouTube is going to get a slight quality increase because everyone can run the latest After Effects models. It means that AI researchers can
Finally.
actually build cool stuff because they're not having to wait on essentially on cards that are 6 years old and essentially using secondhand. It means that we won't
Literally.
just have the large language models and the large image models trained at Google and OpenAI that can afford to have clusters and everything goes to essentially cloud, 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 cloud. It means we can actually start running these things on the edge on in devices because researchers will actually have GPUs that are actually decent to work with. We just haven't had supply. Even if people could afford it, there just wasn't supply for GPUs. They were just getting bought out essentially, and everyone's limited to one at a time. And so you can't build a supercomputer cluster if you're only getting one GPU at a time. But now that you have some groups that are trying to unload all of their stuff all at once, it means that if you actually get like if you know if someone's trying to unload it quietly, oh man, you can get deals on dozens, hundreds of these at a time, and they actually are there because they're trying to offload the supply before the price collapses even further. You're going to see new AI supercomputer clusters and new companies launched on just this piece of news alone. So crypto crashing, yeah, it's horrifying. Oh, that's horrifying. They lost $1 trillion and whatever. It's like yes, but the AI researchers are thrilled about this. They're going to have a lot of fun with all that new hardware.
Everything you said and more.
Yeah, but this October there's supposed to be new cards, and I think the holiday season will probably back up the crypto GPU demand. So It's not going to be
They'll be
long
more
lasting.
adversarial about it. They'll hold on to their cards, and then they'll be like, "No, you can't take it from us. You can hold it, but pull it from our, our dead cold models when our models are trained."
Okay, next up from Reuters, they say they have sources that Twitter is seeking to overturn some Indian government content takedown orders through a judicial review.
Guess how
Uh,
many heads of state are on Twitter's board right now? I checked recently. There's a lot more than there were 8 months ago.
alleging abuse of power by Indian officials. Twitter seeking to overturn some Indian government orders to take down content, which no doubt's causing their employees to lose their shit because they want to defend freedom of speech in countries that don't really have it necessarily. But you got to comply with Mr. Modi because he's the boss.
This is how you get cloned in Twitter. You get
This
Twitter
is
version of India.
precisely how you get your Twitter clone boosted in India if you don't comply with Mr. Modi's demands to take down his opponent's tweets.
Side note. When Europe is demanding that essentially interoperability and having messages that essentially can like communicate with each other, that also lowers the competitive moat for launching competing services for anyone in the world. Europe will try to ring fence it a little bit and try to make it Europe specific, but the way these regulations tend to work is like with the charging, with the cell phones, etc. What that does is it becomes just the standard of how things are built. If you have when you had like Truth Social and Trump and say we want to do our own social network kind of thing, they cloned Mastodon. They cloned some of existing open source frameworks for doing that, and they were able to do so much faster because essentially the standards of interoperability were kind of established. They weren't quite strong enough, but they were kind of there. If you actually have a strong messaging interoperability standard, launching Twitter clones is going to be more normal. Right now, one of the reasons why you see Twitter suddenly starting to say, hey, we have features when they've been relatively static for a few years is just because they see what's coming over the thing and they're going, what can we do that'll make us more difficult to compete with? And it's not just about market share anymore. It's not just about how much can you purge the bots. It's how can you actually keep people entertained with essentially feature sets. So we're seeing lots and lots of experiments with all sorts of different things. They're hoping that they'll make a more difficult clone. I don't think it will work, but it's really fascinating to watch them try, especially as nation states they're willing to say it's a matter of national security that people are entertained on our messaging service. Create something. Anyone that gives us solutions, we will back you. We will endorse you. We'll put all sorts of aid behind you. And it's because it's also emphasized for native languages. You can get naturally a strategic advantage on that. When you have to work with Western character sets, that is default best for international. But if you're not aiming international, you're aiming just domestic, you can take a lot of cool shortcuts like that. And you're going to see a lot of those spin up in the near future.
I'm highly curious to see how freedom of speech is upheld by Twitter in autocratic governments and how those governments kind of manipulate this platform to use it for their own benefit and agendas.
Yes, that's one of the reasons you want that is so you can manipulate things. But I mean, every government wants that. It's USA is not immune to that. We just like to broadcast these ideas and kind of enforce them, kind of, except when it turns against something that's too politically inconvenient. So we're actually pretty light touch as far as things are concerned. We still make lists of every dissident. You're still whenever you say something that's criticizing government, you still go into a public database. If you show up at a certain protest, your GPS does get logged. Now, whether or not that actually shows up in a court trial, or whether or not they use parallel construction on you, it kind of depends on essentially how much you piss someone off. But that's different from if you in China, if you do something, you say something wrong in WeChat about a reference a date showed a wrong symbol on a cake somewhere, you will get brought to the police station. It's not a question of if but when. That's a very very different culture. Even though on the technical back end, it's not that different on paper in practice, it's a hell of a bit of a difference. And we can speak openly about this. That's a big difference.
So here's
So
a
we can
question.
also construct better systems.
Right. So in Twitter's case, in India, Twitter is resisting taking down content that India says needs to be taken down. And the question is, why would Twitter really care? The question that I want to pose is, if you're Twitter and you stand to make billions of dollars from staying friendly with India and participating in India's market, and India says, take down these tweets that we don't like, why would you refuse? Right?
Ethics, morals?
Right. Ethics and morals versus dollars, right? So Now, well, also here's what I'm getting to. Is it possible that America and its intelligence community or agencies are also whispering in Twitter's ear, "Don't take that shit down"? Is it possible that American, um, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to pollute it by saying,
Policy people.
yeah.
Okay, is Twitter America's TikTok?
Kind of. They still have like they still have a leash, but they do kind of operate quasi independently. Look at the board makeups of the tech companies, you can actually get a pretty good feel about how much they're like free or how much they're active state instruments of state policy. But I mean, kind of, it's a little more fuzzy in between. It depends on which group.
Well, it's banned in China for specifically this reason. By the way, it's China doesn't China assume, and by the way, Russia has said very overtly that Facebook and YouTube and Twitter are tools of the U.S. to cause problems in Russia. The Kremlin very overtly says exactly that.
For people
So,
that remember Occupy and some of the other things with Tahrir Square and other things, they're not necessarily wrong. It's a little bit more nuanced than that, but they're not de facto wrong. It's more
oh, the Arab
nuanced, but yeah.
Spring, right? So anyway, I wonder why Twitter is so reluctant to take down content in India when they don't really. I mean, yeah, okay, they're willing. Are they willing to lose billions for morals?
I mean, for market protection, they'd be willing to. I mean, they're not doing like
Can they
foreign
afford
overseas, but
to?
also domestic.
Right.
And
Anyway,
in the
Cut them some
middle
slack
of
on some antitrust. I mean, that goes a hell of a long
I
way.
don't mind. The point I want to raise is I think there's a lot more to being, in the C-suite of a global social media company than meets the eye. I think, and by the
Two
way,
quick things. Two
I
quick
I
have a
things.
think
You remember
question.
I think
antitrust, Microsoft?
I think this speaks to why Jack Dorsey is fed up with running a social media company.
He just wants to have his beard.
Tyler, I have a question.
Yeah,
This is always happening in the middle of the transaction to Elon Musk. And since Elon Musk has emphasized the freedom of speech, so is that, I mean, if I am not sure this happening in India things uh has a relation with uh the company in the US or not. But I mean, maybe it's a reflection or it shows the spirit of that.
If
this has
there's
been
billions of dollars at stake, PR campaigns go with that. That includes misinformation by either side for who's it's part of the negotiation stuff that goes in for whether or not a transaction will go through or not. If there's anything over $1 billion occurring anywhere in the news,
right.
part of that pays for the journalists and the PR campaign. So we're getting to see fragments of some of these negotiations, but
Such
we're
a
not
good.
getting to see the whole thing.
That's such a good point that Chris is making. Is Let me put it this way: in Thailand, where I live, if there's a villa being purchased or a piece of significant beachfront land being purchased, and I love my Thai friends and family and community and all that, but that is an opportunity to make life changing money for simply introducing the buyer to the seller or forwarding the phone numbers or emails, and and then people are going to have their hand out and be like, hey, I helped connect you, let me get my beak wet on that transaction, you just bought $1 million house, where's my 10K 20K, right? So in the US we don't do that. You introduce, you're not worried about a little kickback commission on somebody, getting a new office building or whatever, where in some parts of the world they absolutely would. But in the even in the U.S., even in Europe, when there are $1 billion transactions, all kinds of crazy shit comes out of the woodwork in the way that Chris is describing, where to shift the negotiation and the leverage in one team's advantage, they will happily risk, $50,000 worth of PR to drum up some weird shit to swing the momentum in their favor when they meet again next week at the negotiating table. Oh wow, that's sorry to hear that your CTO was just discovered to have a meth addiction problem. That's such a shame that that came to light. We'll certainly have to include that. We've come to the table this week with a slightly lower offer in light of recent news that your CTO is a meth addict.
It can also
So
be spectators and people in adjacent industries that essentially saying, I don't want that company to be acquired, or I do want that company to be acquired, where you wouldn't think they have any connections or relationship to it. Or a board member that happens to be personally involved with stuff. Like there's some crazy shit that you can bring out, and it's really cheap to do so.
And the politicians. Don't forget the
Oh,
politicians.
yes.
Hey, Tyler, you got this breaking news that's of immense interest to you, by the way, of
okay,
your connection to Sweden. Scandinavian Airlines just filed for bankruptcy.
SAS. Now we well,
No way.
yeah,
Yeah.
SAS. This was known to be happening, by the way, in Scandinavia. So SAS is Swedish, even though they call themselves Scandinavian Airlines. Um, and this isn't the first time. Similar to some American airlines, which over the years have repeatedly filed bankruptcy. SAS has just been a shit
Is
show
this
for.
like
They
Apple's
filed
going
in
to
the
release
United
the
States,
glasses
by the way.
this next
It was an
month or
American
this next
filing.
quarter?
It was an
It's just they're
American
going to
filing.
declare
So
bankruptcy
I
this time.
can't. I can't hear both of you.
Yeah,
Can
I
you
Ken
was
was
going
just
to say
finish that thought?
they filed
Go
in the
ahead, Ken.
United States,
yeah.
which means that they probably have U.S. issued bonds.
Well, it's a poorly the company's poorly managed as of late, which I regret to say because I know the CMO personally and he's a lovely guy, but the company is just and the Swedes want it to be great because Swedes like to be proud of Swedish stuff, and it should be. There's no reason it shouldn't be doing well. It's just it's unfortunate. So the next big topic is from the South China Morning Post that Tencent, Baidu, JD, and other top Chinese tech giants agree to a quote unquote self discipline initiative for NFTs, which includes ID checks and avoiding secondary marketplaces.
Collusion. Let's celebrate.
Well, you're going to have to do what the state wants anyway. So I think I can imagine how that meeting went. Uh, how do
Okay,
you
roll the
want to?
dice. Who gets to be the winner? Who's going to get
Well, no,
bought
but
out?
instead of playing fast and footloose, fancy free as the Chinese tech companies had been doing prior to the massive crackdown of 2021, I think they all now know that the right way to go about this is hello, CCP member, how would you like us to do this so that we can avoid a nasty crackdown 3 years from now after we make, ungodly sums of money? Let's just do this in collaboration together, shall we? And there's this new thing called NFTs. How would you like us to deal with this? And we will do it collectively. And it's sort of a regulatory capture type of scenario, but in
How
collaboration with.
many board members do we need to put party members on to
Right.
make you guys happy?
Right. Yeah, step one. Step one. Yeah. Who's going
How
to
much?
be.
How much do the board members need to be paid out?
Well, again, I always, not well, I usually, and in this case, do say I admire the Chinese efficiency of the approaching this reality. They accept the reality for what it is, and they come to embrace it on from every angle, and it is what it is, and okay, and let's move forward with the cards we're dealt. And you're so I have to admire that in some sense.
Yeah, because they give you no other options. But I think the trend here is clear within the past few months because right now China will have NFT, but you can only buy or sell with non cryptocurrency. But right now the yuan still not clear its role in this. But I believe in future if the digital yuan is fully employed, they can do the transaction with that as well. But right now,
Oh,
no, yeah, no
But
cryptocurrency.
this document is not legally binding, so what difference does it make?
oh, it can become
That
legally binding. It depends on who's enforcing it.
Who
yeah,
needs laws when you have a complete a complete authoritarian regime? Like
because
laws never got in the way. They don't. They're not a nation ruled by law, so it doesn't really matter that you have the law.
It's kind of law. It's like a thin cloth on the outside that it's there kind of, but it
Rule
can be
by
used for
law.
whatever you need.
It's
They
rule
already
by
say
law,
it's
not rule of law.
self-discipline. They have to discipline themselves before their government come and discipline them.
Yeah, it's
So
like
it's just
self-discipline.
proactive.
We are gonna, just pat on our own hands if we do
All right.
something wrong. But
Is
But
there
this
a
is a
law?
very smart way of preventing yourself to get into trouble with the government. So they're smart in a sense.
Is it against the law for men to cheat on their wives?
In some
Not
states, yes.
criminal laws.
Right. It's not against the law, so why isn't everyone doing that?
You
Actually,
You have
forget
to
so
pay a
most
very
states'
high
laws,
price.
they
That's
still have
why.
laws against
Right.
it.
There's a high
That
price.
might not be at the
yeah,
government,
they
it might be at home.
lose their wives and have to pay a lot in divorce settlement.
Right. That's exactly right. So there's other ways to enforce influence and make sure you get the outcome that you want without passing laws. So China's it's as Aram says, it's a self-discipline initiative. I love that. That promises identity checks for users, adherence to
Know
the
your
country,
customer for everyone.
adherence to the country's ban on cryptocurrencies, and a promise not to establish secondary markets to fight speculation. Platforms that sell digital collectibles, as the term used in mainland China for NFTs is digital collectibles that cannot be traded using cryptocurrencies, shall quote unquote require real name authentication of those who issue, sell, and buy. So they're tracking this shit very thoroughly. The assets and quote only support legal tender as the denomination and settlement currencies. So all transactions will have to be done in yuan. The document, an effort from private companies that is not legally binding, was published by the Chinese Cultural Industry Association last week. Many companies involved in China's digital collectibles markets have signed on, including Tencent, Baidu, JD, and Ant Group. That's the big boys right there. The fintech affiliate of Alibaba Group, owner of South China Morning Post. So they're just disclosing that little point. The agreement calls on signatories to firmly resist speculation in the market, do not contain financial assets and unlicensed financial products, including securities, insurance. Yeah, they don't want to see a similar shit show like we've seen in the West.
I think
hey
not
Tyler,
just this. I think
just as
crypto
a
and NFT is probably used for transferring money out of the country. So I'm
Right.
sure the government knows
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So they
Share,
got to
Of
share.
course.
stop it.
Of
Yeah, yeah,
course.
yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
It,
that's the
it,
philosophy
I'm
behind.
it's also worth pointing out that China's more vulnerable to essentially from the party ideologically. It goes down back to like source of like them opening up to the West. They are more ideologically vulnerable for corruption accusations. Where in America we kind of just go and say yes, we legalized corruption. We essentially just say here's the Citizens United. You can buy things highest bidder. We have a process for it though, and you have to be very careful that you follow that process. But just as long as you are, yeah, it's a little bit of a revolving door, but just as long as you don't betray national security, we're kind of okay with it. China is literally, if you are not seeing fighting corruption, people lose faith that the party essentially is everything they say it is. So it's like an all or nothing kind of proposition. The gray
Okay.
zone is at least rhetorically, very, very, very bright. Now in practice, that's very, very different. But the reason why that's important for new markets is that if they are explicitly are endorsing something that has even just the appearance of corruption, that's very, very different from the like NFTs. Every time a news headline comes out saying NFT scam, NFT scam, NFT scam, and if they had a government endorsement of NFT stuff, and then they said, oh yeah, there's corruption, 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 they do not want that linked to the party. If you embarrass the party, bad things happen to you. So they really want to make sure if the government's going to back anything, and saying even by the tech industry saying we've cracked down on tech, oh wait, we have corruption, 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 they don't want those headlines. They want to say everything is well. So that's one component they're kind of heading off of the pass right here, specifically with NFTs, because they see the money changing hands, but they also see the news headlines, and that's the amount of chaos factory they would like to prematurely, essentially, just not have the amount of chaos with.
I will point out one difference there. Yes, Chinese have this. I mean, China has this efficiency here, and it seemingly have a well-regulated law to prevent uh, this corruption. But actually, there's always a loophole because if you
Sure.
have the power, then you have all the right to consider all your actions. So like this NFT and the cryptocurrency thing, now they allow NFT because they figure out how to do it without the cryptocurrency and how to control the money not to going out from China. That's the logic behind it, just like Cheryl said. The laundry thing, they know how to prevent it right now. So now, even it's changed to the name as digital collectible, but actually, they still found it's profitable from the NFT, and especially for those who has connections with the government, especially those high-ranking officers, they have figured out how to profit from this.
Part of
For
the centralization is
yeah,
proposing
yeah.
how you're going to get the party
Agreed
So
with
transferred.
for
BP.
for
Agreed with BP.
regular, for general people, thank you, Aaron. I mean, for the general people, although for those, I mean, non-decentralized, most in the core officials, they are prevented from corruptions all the time. But if you're in that inner circle or small circle, you have all the ways to cover all your bad actions there. Yeah, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, next up, here it is. Sorry, China. Oh, Google releases a Chrome update for Windows to address a very high severity 0-day vulnerability exploited in the wild. This is the fourth Chrome 0-day patch this year. Oh, Chrome so far in the past 6 months has now discovered four 0-day vulnerabilities. Nearly
That
one
we
a
know
week.
of.
You were exactly right. Thank you, Chris.
And for how many weeks has the NSA gotten to exploit this and Five Eyes gotten to have some fun with? And there's like, oh, yes, we found that and patched that. Here's the new batch for the next round.
Next up, Financial Times. China is rapidly censoring news of the alleged, although it was confirmed. So why are you saying alleged? Of the Shanghai police data breach that exposed over 1 billion Chinese citizens' records.
Holy
Uh,
shit.
the
That's
data
like
leak.
OPM level scale. Office personnel management stuff that when they had the entire U.S. government essentially, including all the spies, when they leaked with things, that one might be bigger.
Um, 1 billion records, data leak, and other terms are banned on Weibo. So basically,
Is it 1 billion people or 1 billion like columns included?
no, it said people. So here's the article from yesterday from Sarah Zhang at Bloomberg. It says an unidentified hacker on a forum is selling 23 terabytes of data of allegedly stolen on up to 1 billion Chinese residents and he's selling it for the price of 10 Bitcoin. And then that it was confirmed. Some journalist went and was able to communicate with this unidentified hacker, got a preview of the data, and confirmed, that it is what it appears to be. So that's why I'm
I just got
saying
a message from a member of the audience is saying that it's 22 million for the Christopher Young is saying for the 20, for the OPM hack. So this is like orders of was like what 30x larger. That's potentially huge as far as data stuff.
but the update is because we read that headline yesterday about the data breach, but the headline today is that China is rapidly censoring news of the leak. Yeah, no shit. That's why if you're going to go through the trouble to build the Great Firewall of China, you might as well use it when something like this happens. And this is again, I'm both appalled and impressed with China's ability to control speech on their internet when it comes to censoring of all kinds of things, like the Tiananmen Square anniversary that we just had, and things like this. They can effectively control narratives on an internet, of a billion
Who
people.
owns, who owns this database? Who knows if this was the Chinese government itself collecting all this information on their population and this hacker got into a government database? So China would like to cover that up.
They don't need to cover it up. That's explicit state policy. It's just the thing they want to cover up is the incompetence of guarding the information. That's the part. Collecting it's not a problem for them. Whether or not they can protect it from foreign interference, that's the scandal.
Correct. Yeah, they don't want to be embarrassed of incompetence, not of intrusive data collection.
And
Yeah.
some trivia about this. Actually, this happens on June 30. It's July 1st as the National It's the annual celebration for this CCP. So, and I think there it's intentionally
Oh, I
released
see.
on that day.
I see.
Oh, so it's
Okay,
Oh,
their
maybe
birthday
It's
gift.
the
maybe
priority.
that's a really good point, and that would cause one to naturally assume that the hacker is an enemy of the Chinese state trying to embarrass the state. Like this would be an opportunistic time if you're using because of the proximity in time to the anniversary of the CCP, the big party, the CCP birthday party. This is kind of a done and being leaked at a opportunistic time to with the most highest impact
Yeah,
of embarrassment, and that would naturally lead one to assume that it's an enemy of the CCP who's
yeah,
doing it.
exactly. And we all know it will survived a little bit, like several, at least the several hours on China's at least social media. So they were censored after all, but you can see that day on the July 1st, it was absolutely caught catch people's eyes on that day. So,
it's also it's also worth considering that the groups that would essentially be able to face the reprisals, because when you have a group that literally, like, China essentially has foreign operatives operating in countries all around the world. They will put you in vans across the in other countries, ignoring jurisdiction, like in USA and Australia and Europe and other places. They will do that if you're gonna have a priority. The thing is that if you embarrass the party to this degree, it's worth considering how many groups can afford to do that, because domestically, it's one thing when you hack Alibaba or other things. Yes, you're going to really piss off some people, but if you're going specifically against an organ of state authority, that's a much shorter list of groups that can essentially say, yeah, let's take the backlash for that. Like even Russia, when they were essentially hacking different things, they went, oh shit. The group that was taking out Continental Pipeline, we had kind of blessing from Russia's state government, but oh man, USA is going back, cracking down hard on this. If they didn't have, and then Russia's like, we're not going to protect you. Oh man, that's the thing. So it's worth considering the backlash of who could survive the backlash of that, and that can narrow the list dramatically of the parties that can stand to benefit.
Okay, next up, according to Wall Street Journal research. Oh, this is a chance to play our favorite game. Uh, the global cloud infrastructure, which is dominated by Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. The question is, where's the music? What percent of the cloud is owned by Amazon, Microsoft, and Google collectively?
80%.
90.
92%.
5 to 10%.
95%.
85%.
Are they including your vendors?
Where's
$100 billion%.
Messi?
Where's the
92%.
billion come from?
Out of scope.
Math 101.
60%.
95
60%.
to 98%.
5%.
I think Robert won it with the answer is 65%.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
And Robert guessed 60s. Well done, Robert.
Thank
The
you.
next, and
Our social was 100 billion, but okay.
well, it's it turns out to be it's a $53 billion global cloud spending in Q1 of 2022, which is up 52% from 2018. So over the past 4
So this
years,
is measured by revenue, but not by computing resources, right?
yes.
Okay, that's an
Oh, revenue.
important
Okay.
distinction.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, very important.
Very.
Oh, you guys are so bad.
Next, crypto lender and exchange Vald pauses withdrawals. That's never good. So people can't get their access to their cryptos or do any
Another
trading.
one bites the dust.
So Vald says it's exploring a restructuring after users withdrew about $200 million since June 12th. The Singapore headquartered crypto lending and exchange startup has suspended withdrawals, trading, and deposits.
I hope they start like doing like the crypto memes with everything from like monkeys and like yachts and like thing on the moon. I want to see It's a Wonderful Life come back. Where it's like George Bailey defending is such a thing, going, don't do a run on the bank, don't do a run on the bank, and he's just crying out, going, it's okay, I'm trying to take out Mr. Potter. We need to have more of those sorts of memes going around.
So they made a statement on their blog
Bank runs.
saying the Vault management wishes to inform that we are facing financial challenges despite our best efforts. And
We're
CZ
trying not to be poor.
CZ from Binance is doing a little bit of tap dancing on their grave by saying on Twitter, careful when using platforms that require VC funding. You dog, CZ. Oh, they often don't have a real business model yet. Oh, ouch.
Now, what's
Ouch.
going to happen to these
Vault
guys
is
in 4
backed by
months when
Peter
Binance saying the same
Thiel's
things?
apparently.
Total jab by Peter.
Yeah.
So the next is from Bloomberg about
Hey,
coin.
Tyler, there is a related article that Nexo, the competitor, starts process to potentially acquire Vault.
Oh, so Vault. Well, yeah, Vault looks like they're going to have to sell to somebody. So daily trading volumes at Indian crypto exchanges have dropped nearly 87% after the 1% transaction tax went into effect July 1st. So in the past 4 days, crypto trading volume has dropped as much as 87% because of this 1% tax. Warnings from India crypto exchanges that a controversial new transaction tax would erode trading are coming true, with volumes evaporating since the levy took effect. Yeah, if there's now any kind of tax on trading on your people, it will give people pause to do a trade for sure. Next, from the Financial Times, they did a survey, and it says 25% of Black American investors owned crypto at the start of this year, compared to 15% of white investors, making them, meaning Black American investors, especially vulnerable to the crypto downturn. Higher exposure to digital assets leaves owners vulnerable to downturn. The widespread losses caused the cryptocurrency crash. Yes, but it also makes them puts them in a much better position when they were going up until recently. And I
Exactly. I hate articles like this. It just, I mean, I get what they're trying to highlight, but
right,
those everybody makes a choice and they need to own the up and the down.
Could it
yeah,
just be information asymmetry on just timing?
Yes, yes. Thank you for saying that, Chris. And I think that's the highlight of this article. If you were in the know and you took advantage prior, that's great. But within this community, the information is extremely delayed. And by the time they enter and we enter into this opportunity, typically, especially if we're not well versed, we see the higher impact of loss rather than great return. And so that there's a conversation that needs to be had. I think Alexandra mentioned that about awareness and educating communities that literally are always behind the curveball on every new movement.
the sense that I got, and in part due to Clubhouse and a bit of Twitter, was that there was um, within the Black American community, for lack of a better word, there was a narrative that this is an opportunity to not be left out on. That if we don't get in this, we will be left out. And as so you know what I mean. It seemed like there was an
No,
awareness.
I definitely agree. I think that Clubhouse is a unique vehicle that has created an opportunity for people within the Black community nationally to gather and get the information. The
Right.
issue is Clubhouse has only been in existence for 2 years, right? And by the time people get the understanding, the traction is too late. The curve has been missed and they're behind the curveball. However, for those who are here on Clubhouse, they understand the long term whole, but that's not significantly representative in the entire community.
Uh-huh. Appreciate it.
Tyler, are you trying to say that this is more like an activist movement rather than financial
Well, my
literacy?
my my point is that if it depends what kind of crypto we're talking about here, but
Very much so.
and how things, I don't think it's game over by any stretch. So it'll be
But you
interesting.
could see that information asymmetry playing out again. Essentially, if it's like, well, I guess it didn't work out, so essentially we're going to sell right before essentially information comes out that it's going to go on the upswing again. Even being off by a few days on some of these things, especially with the things with a lot of volatility. When people that are in the know in tech see Netflix starts hitting problems, that's a warning sign going, oh wait, this might hit the rest of the FANG stocks, which might have secondary implications for X, Y, and Z, and they can kind of ease that out a little bit. If you're going off of information that's even just a week after that, that's gonna bite essentially if you have essentially high transaction cost.
And it
I
determines
just
your gains.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Cheryl's point. This is part the crypto movement is part of a greater financial literacy movement that's going on, like basically
Right.
worldwide, but mainly in like the impetus was in the Black American community, right? So there's like, yeah, there's just more people being financially literate, and crypto was, yeah, a big part of that. However, people have been spread throughout, so it doesn't really say what people's portfolios look like, right? So it's just that there's just more people in crypto at that time.
Choices. It's about reading and reasoning where you put your time and where you spend your money. Reading and reasoning. Can't blame anybody else if you opt not to read and then you never learn how to reason.
I like the idea though of um, community. Could not the American Black community decide to overwhelmingly embrace crypto as how they want to transact with each other and with Black owned businesses, and let's adopt Bitcoin and use it as a preferred, you know, way of managing transactions. And then if that gets considerable scale, where it almost becomes synonymous with the community, then politicians would be hamstrung to regulate it for fear, especially Democrats, for fear of being making decisions that are against the community. And I took kind of a skeptical perspective on Jack Dorsey. I proposed essentially this point when we read headlines a month ago where Jack Dorsey and Sean Carter, otherwise known as Jay Z, are working together with the Marcy Projects to um, educate Jay Z's former stomping grounds on Bitcoin and it's called the Bitcoin Project. And I assumed maybe that was sort of their grand master plan, was how do we get Bitcoin more adopted in the urban community or whatever you want to call it. And then my question was, well, why? What's I can assume that as purely altruistic, and if so, I applaud it unreservedly. But is it potentially, if I put on my asshole hat for a second and my skeptic cap for a second, is there a more sinister move here to make crypto synonymous with the community that makes it politically inconvenient to overregulate, and that's ultimately what the crypto community wants, is to not have it be neutered, for lack of a better word.
If
Anyway,
the project was altruistic, I'd agree with that. And
right.
and there I do align with Robert in that every one person within the community has to have some accountability on their education in line with that. But historically, the Black community has never had a person who championed their education around finances. Typically, what they experience is exploitation of their lack of knowledge in that arena. So it's going to be hard to build trust first
Such a
before you
great
do anything else.
such a
We
great
had
point.
institutional redlining literally up through the 1980s, and in many ways, it's in many places it still continues, where literally federal government would literally ban bank loans to one of the largest wealth creation vehicles that we created in this country's history, with home mortgages and such. And even still, in many areas, those practices continue in other forms, even if on paper it's like we don't discriminate on race, etc. In practice, that still occurs in other ways. We used to have a structural system for this. For people that essentially are familiar with it, look up redlining. It is if you want us to talk about finance and Black community, it's one of the best places to start. We're working very hard to essentially open up more opportunities, but it's still we've got a lag time generationally, and it takes time. That's not something that's fixed overnight, even though we really want it to be.
Well,
It's
and you got a point there. I mean, you take my relatives that fought in multiple U.S. wars for liberty, freedom, you name it. When they came back, GI Bill was supposedly offered to everybody, but if you knew the hoops that they had to run through, many of them were not able to take advantage of the bill, whether it was for schooling, for housing loans, this, that, and the other. And yeah, they literally fought. I mean, you had 1 in 16 of us actually fought in World War II. There was over 1 million of us in World War II in the Pacific, you name it, whatever theater, in et cetera. So there were laws that were passed to equalize or make it fair for definitely soldiers and sailors and airmen. Just because it's out there doesn't mean people really have access to it, because there are a lot of deterrents. But, we can't let that hold us back, but that's a part of reality.
there seems like there's a huge potential opportunity for somebody to play a real leadership role on financial um, guidance for the Black community. Like, there should be a national celebrity of that sort. Like, that's just a tremendous opportunity, it seems.
There is a group called Earn Your Leisure, who's like possibly the biggest one that I know personally. There's other people, but they literally just had a conference just I think a couple days ago, with so many people and including like very big corporate people as well. So there is that is, you can go on YouTube and see Earn Your Leisure. They have
Yeah,
programs and everything that help people with that.
I
And
know
what
in
I
Clubhouse,
like
there's a
about
group.
Clubhouse is that it fosters. Oh, Annette, did I cut you off? I might be saying the same thing that you were going to say.
Go for
What
it.
I
Go
love
for it.
about Clubhouse is that it has fostered a platform for like-minded people within the community to combine forces. They've seen that exact need, and not only have they been giving courses on on Bitcoin, on wealth, on stocks, they've been taking this on the road and touring in predominantly saturated Black communities to have these conversations. So there is a movement, but again, I'd lead into this time aspect. It's going to take time to see change happen. But I love what the younger generation is sort of thinking about. I know of a young gentleman, Duran Forbes, here on this channel, very young. He's doing the homework, but not only is he doing it, he's sharing what he's learning and being extremely vulnerable. So these conversations are happening,
yeah,
and I expect greater things from the next generation moving forward.
yeah.
Just one minor point I just want to point out with things. One thing I have noticed about Black and many in the Black community that intersect with tech is that actually, as far as consumer markets are concerned, they are among some of the fastest early adopters. The
Totally.
thing that I've seen also on the other side, though, is it doesn't always carry over essentially in support from the company perspective. As an example, Twitter Vine. Twitter had their own TikTok clone, like competitor, before TikTok got made a big in USA. I think it before even they developed it in China. But the thing, it was adopted almost universally in the Black community. It's astounding, essentially, how fast it spread.
Yeah,
They ran some internal numbers and said, we're not interested in these growth curves and essentially the demographics for this, so let's just shut that thing down. And they lost an entire market before it materialized. But that was something that actually is another worth considering, is that the people that spent time on that as content creators, that were essentially focusing on that, etc., they were building up the equivalent of social credit, essentially, of getting specialized on the platform, building connections, community, etc. That got essentially wasted. That meanwhile, when you have another thing come back and essentially say, here's a TikTok thing, let's start it from scratch. Oh, and by the way, it's coming from another group. It means that essentially everyone's on a level playing field part. So even when there's advantages that actually happen when people are ahead of the curve, it's not always supported in a way that actually leads to long-term growth. And that's something that's not necessarily on the Black community to do it. That's for everyone, essentially, because we need to support that whenever it's occurring.
Hey,
And
Chris,
I can
you nailed
tell
it. The other
so.
opportunity is the 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 group, and I just talked to things as group, but consumer group. That particular consumer group that you highlighted still consumes tends to be the consumer, not the creator. And
Yes.
as long as it is the consumer, it will. I mean, it's just Groundhog Day over and over. But those in business canary in coal mine. Where the business opportunity is, you look how the users are using it and how much time they're looking at it and what else you can get from them. But for the consumer in that group, before they complain, they need to shift from being the consumer to learning how to be the creator.
Mhm.
I'd like to be a voice for the creators, though, and I've seen this happen on several social media platforms where they do create. Like it, love it, or be indifferent, they create. However, the concept is then taken and applied elsewhere, and they don't get the benefit. We do not spend enough time looking at the content creators within this group and saying, hey, love what you're doing, but it's not palatable for a larger group. Here's what we can offer to build that thought process out and really get you to a point of success. We don't respect content creators that are Black. That is absolutely true, and that's endemic on all social platforms. I even know of groups, rooms, platforms that have concepts that are riddled and by concepts that were driven from the Black community, yet the Black content creator wasn't given that proper acknowledgement or financial support. So that's something we have to speak to as well.
Yeah, I'm just I would love to see like what Marquez Brownlee's done on YouTube for gadgets. Where in my mind he's the king of gadgets now. He's the new Walt Mossberg, for the new generation. And I would love to see something like that for financial literacy, and I think there's a tremendous opportunity there. That would be amazing. Anywho, um, the next article that I have here is from Bloomberg from our friend Lucas Shaw. There, Ken, Lucas is back in the news, and he wrote a piece today that Netflix, Amazon, Warner Brothers, and others are cutting costs and scrapping TV shows at record rates.
Okay,
I know
Yeah.
Warner
So
Brothers
I,
cutting costs
I
has literally been the news headline since inception.
Chris,
They
do you
always are
mind?
the cost
Thank you.
twisted.
Go ahead, Ken.
Um, yeah, so Tyler, that's why I think I sent you over the weekend. By the way, so HBO in Europe is going to be cutting basically, I think, all of its original content in certain countries, including Sweden. Um,
Oh, that's
uh,
right.
yeah, and Warner Media made an announcement today, which is really not that big of a deal, But Cinemax, which a lot of people in the United States are familiar with, that you can get through your cable and satellite. They also had like a direct streaming service, kind of like HBO does, so you didn't have to have cable to get HBO. But that it's called Cinemax Go or something. They're eliminating that. So yeah, everybody's cutting back in that area.
Yeah,
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah. This might be an oversimplification, but as somewhat predicted, like at some point the market gets saturated until, and I'm referring to the West, right? Netflix and Disney Plus and HBO and whoever, we're all growing willy nilly as fast as possible. Go, go,
Wall
go,
Street
go, go.
financed a lot of this. They were very
Right.
happy to surprise
Yeah.
at extreme
Oh,
leverage.
it's a land grab. Make no mistake. It's an absolute land grab. It's like supermarket sweep, and you're just filling your cart as fast as you can go until all of a sudden you've maxed out, you've saturated the market, and there's everyone who wants to subscribe to a content subscription is more or less subscribed, and now the low hanging fruit on the tree has all been picked, and now they're going to start going back into austerity measures and canceling projects that they thought they wanted, the really ambitious ones, and paying much more attention to the economics of things. That's just a natural consequence. The weird thing is that phenomena of the low hanging fruit all having been picked happens to perfectly coincide with a major downturn in the economy where people are cutting their subscriptions. So it's an incredibly fast transition from full speed ahead to pulling the e-brake rather aggressively. Yeah,
It's worth pointing out
And
that
you know, and
essentially that before pre-COVID, they were literally having like Nintendo saying a CEO standing up on the stage saying, "We're not competing with video game companies. We're competing with Netflix because there's only so many hours in the day. Every minute that can be monetized has been monetized. Like there's only so many hours of sleep, food, and work. We've got all the other hours." And
Right.
so a lot of other executives were saying similar things, going, there's only so many hours in the day. And so they're getting ready to essentially pull the brake on growth for a lot of these entertainment plays. And then all of a sudden COVID hits, and what do you know? Everyone's got 6 more hours in the day.
Well, this is a great point. Great. This is a really good point because if you spend $100 million on a feature film, that is viewable for 90 minutes. If you spend $100 million on a video game, that is potentially, months of viewing time for some people.
It's
Uh,
fantastic.
and
And
rather,
that's why video games are a bigger business. A lot of people don't realize video games are a bigger business, and they were even pre-COVID. It's twice the size. The video game market and sales is
It's
twice the size of film and entertainment, and that was even true before we closed theaters.
Yeah,
And
Ken is absolutely right. It's actually it actually surpasses the size of both film and music combined, and that
and
happened. That was way before COVID started.
yeah, and the other thing I'd point out, I mean, the things to watch, and because we're approaching where we're going to see quarterly results from these companies again. Watch the churn rate at Netflix, and also watch what happens with Disney Plus, because Disney's in a real interesting situation, and I'm not sure which way it's going to go, because they've combined a lot of their services with Hulu and ESPN, so that may give them a little bit more stickiness. But should they start losing subscribers, because if you're subscribed to that bundle, they don't lose just one subscriber like on Disney Plus, then they lose the ESPN subscriber and the Hulu subscriber too. So watch how Disney Plus numbers go. I mean, they could go either way, but realize that they have a bundle that Netflix doesn't, and makes their economic model, very different.
Before essentially the pandemic hit and they started like combining everything, they actually purchased a smaller group that did like Major League Baseball. Actually, BAMTech was the group that they actually did, that they said we need a Netflix competitor. And there's actually like just a handful, like 2 or 3 executives that actually did that whole transaction. But if you look at the
Yeah, yeah,
financials,
but
they had
But Chris, Disney actually just moved out of baseball a little bit. They gave
yeah, sure,
they
sure, sure.
they they, they,
I'm
they had
describing the technology.
ESPN gave up. I mean, I did this for 20 years, Chris. So you might want to. Okay, I mean, I
Sure,
just covered this up. Okay, so
sure, and I've
Disney.
worked with
Yeah,
executives as well.
yeah, Disney, the ESPN gave up some of its baseball rights to Apple, and the next big announcement to watch is who gets um, the Sunday ticket for the NFL, and because I don't think DirecTV is bidding on a renewal, and a lot of people think it's going to be Apple, and if Apple gets that, you're going to see a lot of migration to Apple TV, even though Apple TV right now doesn't have a lot of original content. Even though the shows that they have been very good, Morning Show and Ted Lasso, but you're going to see a lot of movement to Apple as a streaming alternative should they get Sunday Ticket. And they also bought the rights for Major League Soccer in the United States. Now I should point out that Major League Soccer in the United States is actually only the fourth most watched soccer um, television thing, even in the U.S., meaning more people in the U.S. watch European and Mexican soccer than watch American soccer, believe it or not. But nonetheless, they're making a move into televised sports. And I'm done speaking. Now you can go ahead, Chris. I'm sorry.
Okay, the other point I was making was essentially is BAMTech was specifically not necessarily the baseball part, although that was part of the deal. It was specifically technology based around it. The narrative at the time was, why is Netflix being so profitable, and all these Hollywood groups essentially are losing so much of the streaming game? They're having their lunch eaten from them. They're licensing all their best content to Netflix. How can we get ahead of this? Well, Hollywood doesn't have native tech. So they started going hunting essentially for anyone that has streaming technology that could scale to a certain number of groups and people. Disney moved a little bit faster than some of the other groups did, and the specific technology vendor they did was the same group that did the Major League Baseball, BAMTech, and that was what the thing that they actually built on the technology basis. They built essentially all of their other streaming services around that for the technology foundation. The reason why this is relevant, though, why I brought up ESPN stuff, is that if you look at 2017, 2018, essentially quarterly revenue for Disney, ESPN was making up a ridiculous amount of their revenue. It was something like 20, 25%. You can check my numbers on that, but that ratio, when they're saying we're going to put something with that much value and put that essentially into a subscription package, and it's going to essentially be at a lower price, that's a big deal for them. That's essentially that's not just a technological risk, but it's also a financial one, saying we are betting that people's financial purchasing behavior habits have made a long-term shift, and we're able to essentially commit to that over a long-term strategy. Unlike Netflix, where essentially there's a limited number of existing physical assets they have to worry about, is just servers and a few data centers. I mean, Netflix essentially has like an HQ, a few data centers, and they're done. Disney has giant theme parks. They essentially have physical production facilities. They have an enormous amount of liability. And whenever they do a decision, they have to go, how does this affect the other lines of our business? So when you're seeing essentially their moves in this area, that's something that they have to take into account. Other groups might be a little more lighter on their feet, but Disney, one thing they have that very few other groups have is access to capital. They've essentially at this point 60-70% of their financial basis is actually made up of essentially banks. Like, it's actually kind of crazy when you look at the board structure. The reason why that's relevant is that access to capital means that they can essentially outlast a lot of their other competitors where they have to cut costs. So we'll see essentially if that's going to be enough to hold them through this next little weathering bit.
By the way, Chris, just as a point, I mean that's not true anymore, but for many years, Netflix cost of capital was essentially zero. Okay, because its stock was so inflated.
It's incredible.
Yeah, so they basically had a zero cost of capital. So I don't think Disney had a cost of capital advantage for most of the last 15 years
Oh
anyway.
no, very much so. I'm saying that the situation now is the case with things. That's very much a very recent turn of events because Netflix wouldn't have been paying for the capital, but Disney sure would have. But now, when you're looking at the longer term, going, well, how much IP has been proven over 10, 20 years, essentially, to keep people coming back to the theme park? Disney has other assets they can go back to.
Hey, I have a question since we were talking, you guys were talking gaming there for a while. Beyond EA Sports, what would you say are the top gaming stocks or companies out there that have good legs and a nice horizon?
Microsoft.
Isn't
Uh,
it Blizzard
Unity.
and Activision?
What was
I
the
don't know if
question?
Epic's publicly traded, but if they
It's
ever go
Epic, yeah.
public,
Unity got hit pretty hard,
Question.
like everybody did since November. But long term, Unity's in probably one of the best positions for the entire metaverse play. But it's to me a really smart play because it's one of the smartest if you want to just play the metaverse generally as a trend, and just video. It's backed by games, even if the metaverse doesn't even happen. So it's by the way, because both Unity and Epic are both getting diversifying tremendously into all kinds of other product categories for government stuff, city development, all kinds of stuff.
you might see it like automotive like factories end up standardizing on Unity as a platform for digital twins. Like, there's some weird side markets that might actually become dominant over the long term. We don't actually know essentially what those will be, but those R&D efforts, if I one of the things I found was hilarious is a few years back I was applying for research and development like director jobs at different labs and such. One of the things I got back is we don't see enough video game engine stuff on your on your resume, which was hilarious. But they're all going and saying we want to put video game engines in all of our labs. So all the R&D engines in all these different places in the world are having that as a part of their portfolio. One of the things that's specifically important for Unity, that's a little contrast with Unreal, is Unity went a little bit of a different curve on how they did their technical stuff. They have an enormous amount of technical debt. Their engine needs to be rebuilt in order to scale to metaverse scales. And that is going to be painful for them. It's probably going to mean about like a 2 or 3 year, maybe 4 or 5 year essentially layover. They're going to hit at one point where they don't have new features. They're just rebuilding the engine. They can probably pull it off, but it is going to be something a little painful when they're competing with Unreal Engine, which has already gone through a massive re-architecture, even recently. And they are just flying on that. They do not have the same level of technical debt that Unity does. So that is something to take into account about the rest and recover versus essentially sprint type kind of speed that you see in different tech companies. Unreal is ready to race right now. Unreal is going to have essentially a bit of a stalling thing here for a little bit, especially if they've got to essentially have to worry about layoffs. So they'll probably be okay over the long term, but in the short term, they're going to have some pain to deal with. And I think that if they recover from this well and they pick their markets well, you're going to see that very strong over a long term play. But I'd be a little pessimistic over the short term.
But right now, with because of how the markets have pushed tech down, first of all, Unity is basically sideways, hasn't gone down since early May when everything else continues to have downward pressure. They've gone sideways since early May, so for 2 months now. And as if there's no one left to sell. Everyone's holding at $40, basically. No one wants to sell it below 40 because the market cap is 12 billion. It's there. Is Unity worth 12 billion? I think all day long it's worth 12 billion. So, and I think
They
it
have fundamental value.
right, and it makes it incredibly possible acquisition at a 12 billion market cap valuation. It makes it an incredibly interesting acquisition target by anyone who wants
Oh,
to
that would be a fantastic acquisition target. Apple,
precise,
Microsoft, Google, any
precisely.
or a new entrant. Like you could see someone like Trimble. Essentially, it's like why Trimble? It's like well, they bought SketchUp. They essentially
I'll
bought some
predict
of
it.
Google's assets.
That is so likely. I would even wager that. I mean, at least
Hyundai could pull something like that off. There's so many
there's,
groups that essentially are well
there's
capitalized from adjacent markets that could take so much
right.
advantage of that.
There's a dozen companies that would it would be make a perfect sense as an acquisition target at that range of
And
market.
their internal R&D labs will back up that, saying from a tech basis, we can work with this, we can customize it, we can make it work. The thing that's a little bit tricky is from a business perspective, going how are we going to strategic align, because that's not a short-term play. That is like a longer term, like we are going to align on saying we want to do flying car simulations, we want to do digital twin simulations, or we're going to essentially be like the ultimate VR simulation thing that we're doing for, I said, a lot of simulations here, but we want to do an AI training thing for self-driving cars. There's a lot of like weird markets that Unity is in that they have solid foundations for. The thing is that because they've tried to be everything to all things to all people, and that's what a good game engine does. It is flexible, it's nuanced, it has a lot of things. If you have an acquisition target like that, you will see parts of those other branches chopped off. However, the core is good. It just takes a little bit of time to re-architect for this next push. So yeah, acquisition target. This would be a really good fit for that.
Yeah, and just for some background about Unreal, how they're doing the metaverse stuff now, they've actually partnered, I think, with Microsoft recently with Azure to do this the kind of live tracking of sensors and other things. So to really integrate the metaverse with the actual universe and have sensor data and all that stuff. Unreal Engine or engines in general, game engines are ideal for that kind of stuff. So it's an interesting
And
approach, but sad to see that Unity's not doing so well.
and Tim Sweeney has the right idea for the future. I mean, he talks open source every time he's interviewed, so I think that's the way to go.
And they've walked the walk on that. Like they've actually made like core parts of their engine available. They've even gone back, like they've gone way above and beyond with like just some very, very old engine assets that no one really cares about. And then they've figured out how to open source those things, which, there's a small number of people affected by that, but it does speak to essentially a larger ethos that will probably leave them longer essentially in this sort of thing. One thing that I am a little worried about is that if Unity exits the market or essentially gets acquired or starts super focusing on essentially something else, this will not leave Epic Games with essentially a decent competitor, someone that essentially with Fortnite levels of revenue coming in. And that's dangerous because we saw what happened to Google and some of these other tech giants when they were just, the small scrappy groups or something that was like held the flag for essentially open source or essentially is like, we care about developers. Once you essentially don't have a monopoly, it gets bad real quick. So we want to keep that competition going. And if Epic is going to go in this direction, Unity's going to go in another. We want to find some of these other game engine groups that essentially are willing to compete. They might be niches right now, but we want to keep that engine going because the industry is too large and the cultural impact is so large. And the spin-off things, for everything from artificial intelligence to flying vehicles to self-driving cars, transportation things, factory simulations, all sorts of stuff. All of this relies on having a very strong sector for not just the gaming, but the industrial sector, and that's going to come down to GPU supplies, AI resources, cloud compute, etc. We want to have as much competition with this as possible, and that's something that is being consolidated right now.
Well, I think Tim Sweeney did something really clever. They did the Epic Mega Grants, which was a $100 million fund that they gave away to people who wanted to contribute to the engine or were starting projects. So they went from 1 or 2 million developers to a few more million developers. So they really kind of invested in the developer community themselves, not only in academia but also industry. So you see all these enterprise solutions, also Mandalorian. So they really went far above and beyond compared to Unity. Unity was kind of sitting on its hands that whole time, unfortunately.
They were cash strapped. They didn't have access to Fortnite. That's one of the key strategic differences. Epic Games was able to have a cash cow, and then it's like, how fast can we spend this? And they spent it very well.
Tyler, I think it was 5 days ago, I tweeted out an article, two articles actually, because there was a second company also. But Unity actually laid off a couple of hundred people. So obviously, they're like everybody else in tech. They're cutting back a bit.
What was the date on it? I think we read that one here,
5 days ago. It was 5 days ago. I tweeted out the news.
and the stock is up since then. So
Interesting.
this is my point: is that had no impact on the stock whatsoever? Is my point.
But by the way, there's a strong game developer community here on Clubhouse. They were actually hosting rooms about trying to get some of the Unity developers some new jobs elsewhere with things. So there's actually they're well represented here on Clubhouse if you ever want to like find out the internal politics about such things.
Okay,
It wasn't a well reported story, so I wouldn't look at the stock as a indication of Vivo. Yeah.
I'm just saying. I think basically it's been that lemon has been squeezed as hard as it can. I think it's been shook out, as traders vernacular would say. So it's
Well, one more thing to consider about Unity's business model is compared to Epic. Epic makes essentially a large amount of their money off of Fortnite, but they have some from engine sales, but it's only to 30, 70 different groups. There's only so many AAA groups that essentially want those huge, like saying we need a priority support kind of thing. Unity has a similar business model in some regards, but for them, they get like 15, 20%. I'm making up some numbers here. I looked at it a few days ago, but it's like 15, 20% for engine sales. But actually, the majority of their money is actually it's like 40 to 50% of their revenue actually comes from cloud services and advertising. And that's essentially affected by the entire market. So essentially, when you're playing your favorite game, essentially on your little, on your iPhone or whatever, it's collecting user data on that, and it's using reporting analytics that's allowed them to do that. So it's also essentially if it's serving any ads, yeah, that all goes into essentially the same pool. But because Unity essentially has a lot of that middleware that they're providing as a cloud service and also some developer tools, etc., that means that if there's any slowdown in tech overall, that means the ad revenue that they're taking small cuts of also reduces as a part of that whole thing. So they are much more sensitive to that pricing pressure than, say, Epic Games is. So again, this is essentially like different sub-socializations, different niches essentially being affected by the market at different rates.
okay. Here we go into the tweets. The first tweet I have is from Jeff G via Wired. The headline says, "Sharing music rescued my relationship with my teenager. I texted her Joni Mitchell. She sent me songs of her own. Slowly, my daughter began to open up to me again," which is an uncharacteristically kind of beautiful tale here from Wired. And the reason I'm sharing it is because I watched a YouTube video recently titled something to the effect of why aren't young kids listening to music? And what they mean in the YouTube video was quite a really interesting point that was being raised in the video, was that traditionally, computers and phones have taken over video games to some degree, to continue on the Unity Unreal point, social networks and whatever, um, are somehow filling a gap or playing an important social role that young people go through as they develop through their teenage years. It's a very well understood phenomena, at least in the West, that in your teenage years, your identity is somehow, in some degree, shaped by the music and the artists that you associate with. And then you have even social movements that sort of come out of this, like punks and death rockers, heavy metal, folks, and they have their own attire and hairstyles and fashion and slang language that they develop and everything else. And yet, that's notably missing in 2022 from youth today. There isn't a musical movement that they're attaching to in the way that generations had previously. And it's because of technology to some degree. That's sort of the point of the YouTube video. And it's kind of interesting that music isn't playing a role in social development of teenagers in the way that it used to. So, and that music isn't as powerful of a force politically as it used to be. Like with going back to starting with Elvis through the Beatles and the everything else. So I thought this article was also kind of interesting about how young folks are discovering music, and it's reportedly young folks are particularly being smitten with classic stuff. Like this article points out that the daughter in this story, she falls in love with Stevie Wonder and the Beatles and Joni Mitchell and The Cure, which uh, are
Do
the.
10-second TikTok things count as music?
That's a great point. That's a really great point
I know
because
older
they're
generations might not say that, but I mean younger might have different opinions.
right. They're getting a very um, new interpretation of what music is really about. If your exposure to music is happening through TikTok, yeah.
That's where I'd like to
My
link it to
satellite.
some neuroscience, because essentially the shorter those bars, I wonder just how creative the mind will then be or fail to be if you're reducing the amount of complexities you're doing in music. I don't know if you see it that way.
Yeah, let
I think they have on my satellite radio back here in the States has a channel that plays just songs from TikTok, and they play the full length of them. And it's a very varied selection because the stuff on TikTok is current, and you hear old bossa nova, you hear classical music, and they play it all.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but there's a TikTok Music 101 or Song 101 in I'm not sure if it's in English version as well. Like teach you how to write a song within 30 seconds because you need to shorten it with only the best of the best. So in the end, there is no many less hit songs are not made of logic. They just try to make it viral, so a lot of the lyrics doesn't make any sense. It's just trying to use the melody or how to pronounce it to make you remember it maybe by heart or just subconsciously. You just remember it, and
But
then yeah, that profit from it. So that kind of song is like a fast food.
There's
but
also repeat exposure breeds familiarity, and people want to buy things that they've heard a lot more. So essentially, if you just play it over and over and over and over again, that's something that also works. The other thing to consider is AI generated music is right on the cusp of coming out. It's not quite there yet. It's advancing a little bit slower than some of the like the text or the images, but they already have prototypes of this that can create any music genre you can imagine. The problem is that it sounds like essentially some ghost is trapped in the machine and screaming essentially for a release. It's actually kind of scary. You'll hear these weird artifacts and stuff. Once they've worked those things out, I'm sure it'll be very pleasant to listen to. But right now, it's a little scary. But but AI generated content based upon these data sets. And by the way, TikTok's collecting all of that information. So when the Wired article is talking about how to generations and prior things like sharing music, it's like, well, there's a social part to that. But the new thing that's changed is the way that that's monetized and the way that essentially those assets are distributed. It's a very different kind of relationship that people are having to music these days.
To be a little meta about this, though, I think that, it sounds like when people my age say, oh, that music today, it really stinks. It's really some of that. This is the evolution, and this generation, this is the way that they're making music. And I think that it's important to accept it.
I agree. Remember, not every song has to make sense. Some of us used to love 99 of Blue Balloons. I mean, really? So, what, what is fascinating is how this new technology is reawakening for a younger generation music that either some of us listen to or our parents listen to. I mean, come on, these people know about uh, Jackie Wilson and Sam Cooke and Elvis more than ever, or you name it. It's just amazing. I mean, look what happened to some of the artists that have been selling their music, and look what it did for Fleetwood Mac when all of a
Yeah,
sudden a guy on a skateboard did
skateboarder.
something,
Yeah,
and then
great point.
huge.
But
Yeah, that,
that kind of thing like that, this meow 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 meow. That,
Oh, I love that.
My
But that's a
favorite
yeah,
music
you
song.
love
commercial in
it.
my
But
industry. Meow
I
meow
mean,
meow
Ba,
meow
ba,
in
meow
ba.
meow.
social context, yes, it's it's like we all share the same memory. That's the value of it. But the song itself, come on, you still at least meowing. So
Terrible on
you love
artistic
it.
value, great for
Phoebe, do you know
virality.
what kind of memories you generated for me when you started doing meow meow? That used to spell cat mix and cat
Yeah, but I
food.
mean, the song itself is illogical. But
It used to
yes,
be in
in
Library of
this
Congress. It's a
sharing
it's a
memory
cultural
thing, it's
touchstone.
yeah, it's valueless. Yeah, it's a forever thing.
Quick little personal anecdote. This is very quick, but so when I grew up in a very sheltered household, and I didn't get to hear anything outside of classical music for a while because my parents were very much about you don't want to be influenced by that media stuff. It's going to lie to you. It's like it's kind of weird actually in hindsight. But anyways, um, So I get to be like 15, 16 year olds. So I'm going to school and I'm realizing, wait, I haven't heard like any of the music anyone's listened to. I should get caught up in pop culture. So what I do is, some young nerd. I go out and I go, well, let me pirate this music. I pirate all the pop culture music of the last 100 years of hits. And I got to listen to all of it binging essentially for a few months, and that was a trip. One of the more hilarious two little fun anecdotes of that. One of them is finding out that the Weird Al versions I heard of everything, there was actually music he was parodying first, so I've heard the Weird Al versions of every parody first. And the other one was that there was, because of torrenting and because you just collect all the music from the world factor there. One of the things that I learned is that a large amount of the collection was curated by someone else, and one of the curation points of that is they had a very large quantity of Irish Rebellion music. And so I'd just show it to my friends saying, hey, let's essentially listen to some party music thing. This is cool or whatever. And then we'd hear essentially recruitment songs for the IRA and essentially how to join an Irish terrorist organization. This is just weird things that happen when you're listening to music in an unapproved format. Right now we have very specialized channels, Spotify, etc., YouTube, and everything. So it's essentially it's a well worked out format. TikTok is a little more experimental, but it's still essentially there's known channels, no monetization pathways, etc. What I'm really excited about is when people are going to start doing something that's essentially not approved, not essentially understood, and they start combining weird variations of technologies together. That's where we're going to see essentially some of the greatest amount of artistic exploration, and I think that's where essentially we should be paying attention to if that emerges, that we can be early adopters, supporters of that kind of thing, because that's where the exciting stuff comes from.
Okay, next up is from Tomoko. It says, creativity is not just for the young, a study finds. If you believe that great scientists are most creative when they're young, you are missing part of the story. A new study of winners of Nobel Prize in economics kind of debunks that theory, according to this article.
I
But
I
that's
thought Albert
that also
Einstein debunked that theory.
Does that
well.
apply to mathematics?
There's a big problem, I think, with the average age of principal investigators, or where we're not getting as many new innovative ideas or the diversity of ideas. So maybe it is good for innovation, but it's not necessarily good for diversity because we're getting clustering of subjects or causes.
Science marches forward with every funeral.
It says there's another kind of creativity which is found among experimental innovators. These innovators accumulate knowledge through their careers and find groundbreaking ways to analyze, interpret, and synthesize that information into new ways of understanding. So sort of
That sounds like creativity.
yeah, it sounds like, but also augmenting the classical definition in a sense. So anyway,
Does everyone remember 10 years ago when they said human creativity can't be automated? Those jobs are safe. Thank you, Oxford. Thank you, World Economic Forum. If it involves human creativity, that stuff is safe. It involves human empathy or relationships with other people. There's no way we can create conversational robots that can do this sort of thing. This is what they told all the world leaders. Now you see Dolly and everything else coming out with creativity, and it's like the academic literature on creativity does not reflect the current state of the art, and it hasn't for a while. There's a reckoning that's happening when these fields are going to start talking to each other more, and as we start building some of the more advanced tools that's happening right now in the artificial intelligence.
the next is from Tom.
Yeah, Chris, if you ever have the opportunity and you're in Boston, you should definitely go to Northeastern CAMD. You'll be wowed by what they're doing. It dovetails perfectly into what you're saying.
Shoot me a message. I'd love to hear more.
Awesome.
So Tomoko found this one from CoinDesk that Coinbase is reportedly selling geolocation data to the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
That's a spelling freedom.
Watchdog group Tech Inquiry reported the new details about the 3-year contract with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security.
This
That's
goes
Coinbase.
beyond standard know your customer, by the way.
That's like arrest your customer and deport your customer. DYK.
And all
That's
those anarcho-syndicalists and all those anarcho-capitalist groups saying essentially Bitcoin is the root of freedom. And it's like, well, it's only like 117 million people on Coinbase or something. It's like, yeah, that's it. But they didn't do the research. It's like, well, I mean, eventually you need to transact with the finance system. So, I
I'm,
mean, the moment you do.
I'm imagining how that scenario unfolded, right? Like as a scene in a movie where Coinbase obviously knows they need to get government on their side. That they've always sort of taken that approach, right? Like we know how Brian went to Washington D.C. and tried to meet with the SEC and couldn't get a meeting, and blah blah blah.
We're
And
the
you can,
legitimate one.
right, but you can imagine how the government's concerned about what's going on that platform, and that platform wants to be blessed as being kosher by the powers that be in DC, and that could create a beautiful scene in a movie where the deep state actors come in and say, listen, if you really want to be on our good side, here's a laundry list of things that you could be very helpful with us on and get in our good
It's
graces.
patriotic.
Right. And by the way, I mean, this goes back to my point about, how governments use their tech platforms. And Coinbase being an earlier one that's a little more vulnerable in its fledgling state and could be potentially extinguished, or hampered, if not in the good graces of the state. The state could put some unsavory demands on them to, or of course, we'd be willing to pay you for a list of, particular names that we're looking for who we think are going to be very. I can imagine. Let me frame it this way: I can imagine that the state, meaning the U.S., is very concerned that a lot of bad bad people, bad hombres, as somebody once said, would
Consider
be
cross border transactions. This is a traditional thing.
right.
They always want to launder everything.
That Coinbase would be a haven for bad actors. And so, if you can help us, that could be very useful to us. That your site is a haven for bad actors, and if you cooperate with us, well, then we certainly are going to appreciate that and factor that in when we're making our regulations about your platform, right? So, and by the way, we will even pay you for the privilege. How's that sound? Because we know you're a startup, you need money. How about we become your biggest customer?
This
See,
makes your valuation spreadsheets look great, by the way.
right. Oh, by the way, the U.S. government's your biggest customer, and so. Oh, and by the way, going back to CZ's point about needing investors because you don't have a business model, didn't we just reveal that tweet 30 minutes ago? And here's Coinbase with a very robust business model with a
This
very
one will work even when transaction fees go up, essentially over time.
so shit gets really weird, when you start providing services that the government find of national security interest. Anyway,
Keep in
the
mind
next
this extra juicy data because the requirements for know your customer paperwork. I mean, they've got everything. They got like driver's license and all the other stuff, and that was part of essentially them being more legitimate than the other platforms. So you combine all of that know your customer paperwork, not just essentially for the high net wealth individuals, but just anyone using it, and then combine that with the geolocations live as a thing. I mean, good frack. There's probably a whole tab on Palantir systems when they're looking for how to find dissident number 369 or whatever. It's like, wow, there's a whole tab here. Look, it's beautiful. I can see their live location with things. This is when they did their financial transactions. That's great. One more thing for the data lords.
next up, a hacked Tesla. This is from BB. A hacked Tesla Model S Plaid achieves a record-breaking speed of 216 miles per hour. The vehicle was hacked to remove its speed limitations. A man named Guillaume Andre stepped onto the accelerator pedal until the Tesla reached a top speed of 216 miles per hour. For our metric friends, that's 348 kilometers per hour, breaking the record. There you go. Next up from Ken, a short New York Post article that a short-staffed hotels are hiring robots, and labor unions are pushing back. How the hell are you pushing back against robots exactly?
They're pushing back. No, the labor unions. Oh yeah. Well, basically, they'll go on strike. I mean, there's a transition period, so they threaten to go on strike, or they do go on strike,
Yep.
and then they kind of like build in like clauses in the contracts, kind of like the UAW did for a while, that guaranteed them jobs even if they didn't need the jobs. So you had, the United Auto Workers as the UAW, and that all before the bailout that Obama gave them. I mean, they actually had situations where UAW workers, where there was no work, would go to, they would make them to report to work and they would play Trivial Pursuit, but they were employed, they got a paycheck. So that's kind of what the hotel situation is. At some point, they're gonna have to take a strike and live through a strike because they're trying to hang on. So that's how they push back.
A handful of hotels in the U.S., from the Mandarin Oriental in Boston to a Holiday Inn Express in Redwood City, have begun turning to robots to provide guests services usually performed by human employees. Need an extra towel? Forget your shampoo? Order takeout from Uber Eats? A robot with a name like Alfred, Jeffrey, Alina, or Moby will deliver, not with a knock on your door upon arrival, but typically with a ping on your phone. Anyone who lives in Asia is familiar with this, by the way, especially China, by the way. This has been going on in China, and it's at scale in China for quite a few years. And by the way, China has relatively much lower labor costs, so these kinds of things are going to be happening in the higher labor cost markets before you know it, and they work.
Well,
If
Tyler,
you
you actually you mentioned the Uber Eats, and one of the things that's been going on. I mean, it really accelerated post pandemic, but was going on even pre pandemic. A lot of hotels, including some high end hotels, even like the New York Hilton, and that was pre pandemic. They eliminated room service because it's too expensive to do with the labor costs. They actually lose money on room service, and there's less and less hotels doing room service. Than they used to be.
Well,
right,
what they do actually is connect with restaurants in the area and allow room service to be ordered through those restaurants
right,
directly. You know.
Well, that's
I
what I
do.
meant. The Uber Eats. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, but they don't have their own room services anymore.
No,
No,
they completely eliminate that overhead. Yeah.
I do that at my resort. I encourage all of our guests, and I provide them all of the ways to order from all of the restaurants locally and have it delivered to their doors. So it's
This really should be more of an if then statement. You know, if there are no resources, human resources available for hire, then, you know, use of robotic resources are absolutely, you know, available or should be available. But these union, I mean, I'm not in any way a non-union person, but the truth of the matter is that this manipulation of and then having people sit around and play Trivial Pursuit just sounds ridiculous, considering that the reason they were using robotics, and I'm just using this example that was given, it's like if there wasn't anybody to hire to begin with, we had to use robotics. Totally makes sense. Oh God, sorry, I just had to make that comment because I'm sitting here just rolling my eyes. Thanks.
One thing to pay attention to is essentially cost of automation is nosediving. It's not just essentially happening with the creativity algorithms, with essentially with like AI and stuff, both being able to draw pretty pictures. It's also happening for the sensors and being able to have cheap cobots that essentially can be, instead of having requiring 6 months to train with an engineer that you have to bring them in. If you do a consumer based version, it's just the economics just don't work in the past. Now you're looking at $10,000, $30,000 cobots that with less than an hour of training can replicate a repetitive task over and over and over again. And if that's a human being that they're on a manufacturing line or as a line cook in a kitchen, etc., those numbers start to look attractive, and it becomes a matter of, are you willing to take a technological risk on it? Now, it used to be if the minimum cost of automation is something that's going to cost millions of dollars and require an R&D fund, yeah, only a few groups essentially will be willing to try that in limited trials, essentially in a prototype area, and then they say, okay, that's cool, we'll be ready for the future in 10 years. But
Yeah,
we're
but
starting to
but
cross thresholds now where that technology is cheap enough that you can experiment with it and actually automate tasks very, very quickly for ROI. So if you get ROI within four to 12 months, these things could spread like wildfire in some of these sectors. I'm seeing laundry, some of these other things, like it's not that far off, and it's the price just keeps on dropping.
and then to add on top of that, if the item can be used long term, more than 5 to 7 years after you've fully depreciated it, now you have zero expense for that particular job where you would
Sure.
normally have increasing wages.
I'm seeing like 4 to 12 months in manufacturing. I think the food sector with stuff is about like 10 to 16. I mean, it's like it's shocking. So I mean, and the thing about this is very, very like focused on essentially where they're putting their resources. And I see that essentially the biggest benefits of this are going to be essentially a non-traditional automation in sectors. The ones that they essentially we wrote off as saying, well, labor costs are too high, so it's not worth it, kind of thing. Well, it's like, well, guess what? Labor costs are going up, and everyone's complaining about it, kind of thing. At least on the business side, and they're complaining on the on the employee side too. So what's going to happen is there's going to be a smaller number of people employed, and they're going to be paid more money, and then the people essentially have their jobs automated are essentially going to have be participants in that training. It's going to be a very different like contrast to what happened in the automotive sector, where it was you have giant amounts of robots competing against giant numbers of unions, and then they're going back and forth for who's going to win, for whether PR or capital resources for doing such a thing. I see essentially it's going to be much more of a soft automation that's going to happen, essentially, where you have cheap robots, and once your job is automated, it's like, well, what do you do next? Well, you're still there employed in the company. You can find other useful things to do because the company's productivity just increased, and actually you can actually charge more money for the thing else you can do now. So it's just a very different way that I think we're going to end up having this evolve. But anyway, it's a fascinating market to look at. You want to learn more about the topic, essentially look up something called Universal Robotics. They got 50% of the cobalt market, and they're a fascinating company. I see a lot of other traditional groups like Fanuc and some of the other robotics groups are going to be copying them in the near time or future. So it's weird watching this stuff develop.
Okay, next up is from Thomas Tong from Wired. It says autonomous drones could soon run the UK's energy grid. The national grid is testing computer manned drones that can save millions in maintenance work. And Thomas also found one about new solar windows that replace regular glass and generate solar power. A breakthrough
A
in
popular project these days.
A breakthrough in semi-transparent solar cells has created the highest efficiency per visible light transmittance prototype yet. And if these things continue to make progress, then and you could start seeing regulations that say all buildings that have kind of windows will need to be able to capture solar energy.
The real challenge is manufacturing, about whether they can make the manufacturing cheap enough. Many of the ones that use more exotic chemistries have difficulties on their supply chain or the manufacturing components. The other one is whether or not it's not going to be less energy than you have in a traditional one typically. The other thing is whether or not it will survive long enough to be useful. If the solar panel only lasts for 3 or 4 years, it's not that useful. If you have it essentially go for 30 years, it's like, well, yeah, you can get that traditional finance loan for that. So you're going to see essentially that's going to be the real like where rubber hits the road, because there's hundreds of groups that are working on this right now, thousands essentially in some other contexts. Whether or not they're going to survive the next two hurdles is going to be the real thing to pay attention to.
Okay, next up, Thomas found this one that a Swedish company makes award-winning human meat burgers. A Swedish company called Oomph created the limited edition human meat burger from plant-based meat for Halloween and won
What a
awards for
great brand name.
OUMPH.
Wait, what
Can
does
I have
And
that
that burger
mean,
with more
human
oomph?
based burger? What exactly does that mean?
it means somebody had a clever marketing idea on Monday morning, over the weekend, that they brought into the office on Monday morning and said, hey, why don't we say that these are human meat because it's really plant-based.
It's Soylent Green.
Oh, because human made them, so it's human meat, I guess.
No, it was a Halloween marketing stunt is what it was.
You sure it wasn't April Fool's?
No, that would have worked too, though.
Yep.
The next is Thomas Tong found this one that the U.S. is now funding VPNs to enable people to fight censorship in Russia. A campaign by the One Technology Fund is providing people in Russia with free access to VPNs so they can get informed with what's really going on. Because all of your domestic VPNs are owned by the boss over there in the Kremlin, and they're using it to track you.
I'm
As
sure
a,
the next time there's a Snowden disclosure, they'll be very accurate about transmitting those informations as well.
so, interesting move there to try and educate break the information silos there.
Total
And
reciprocity, I guess.
by the way, it goes back to my point that the Kremlin is perhaps not wrong in their accusations that the U.S. is intentionally weaponizing U.S. social media big tech platforms. Um, you know, as I mentioned an hour or so ago. Well, here's an example of exactly that. Like the U.S. clearly has a strong motive to try and get information to the Russians. So
Let's flash forward in the
Well,
future. Let's say
last week,
TikTok gets banned. And kids are essentially using VPNs to access the TikTok that's banned in the USA with things, and China's going, well, we can help like give a little thing to that.
Chinese
Now it becomes
VPNs.
unpatriotic. Yeah, now it becomes
Yeah, yeah.
unpatriotic essentially to access TikTok.
There are products selling those VPNs though for the videos you can only watch in China. There's because in China there are so many piracy videos there, and of course their own drama or other things there. So there are VPNs only for if you want to see contents in China as well.
Okay, speaking of censorship, Thomas just found one from Gizmodo that China tries to censor what could be the biggest data hack in history. We covered that one earlier today. In fact, that was like one of the top three stories of the day. Evan found one. Speaking of burgers, he just found this one from Newsweek. He's combining burgers and Russia. We got both in one here. That was an amazing coincidence. This is about Russia took over McDonald's. McDonald's left Russia, right?
So
And
they flipped it
so
upside down.
right, and so Russia made it McDowell's basically, and with a new little brand and whatever, and kind of nationalized the stores. And now
Oh, McCutton.
the headline from Newsweek says mold and bugs in burgers at Russia's McDonald's substitute spark outrage. The burger chain now operates under the name Vkusno and Tochka after the global giant McDonald's pulled out following the invasion of Ukraine. But there's now uh,
Do you think they'll
outrage,
register this trademark with the World Trade Organization? You know, just to make sure their brands are protected.
but there's apparent outrage happening over reports of mold and bugs in the burgers. Unless it's the new cricket burger. And then they could spin it that way, I guess.
Maybe it's for Halloween too.
maybe it's a
The
human burger and they've got something else going
oh,
on.
don't let's not go there.
Maybe
But
if there's $50 billion in arms transactions that are occurring over this, someone can pay for a little bit of PR for a really fun article into the site.
the
So the
Russian
sesame
version.
seeds actually on the Big Mac actually are moving now. Huh?
So a Twitter user posted a video clip of birds pecking at a stack of burger buns outside in the back of the establishment, citing it as a grim example of Russia's experiment with fast food import substitution. Images posted have shown what appears to be insect legs and bugs in the burgers, while other pictures document creeping mold on the burgers. In response to the claims, a spokeswoman for the chain told Newsweek that, quote, product quality and safety is our top priority. Well, yeah, but you can still have bugs in your burgers, and it can still be your top priority. Uh,
Extra protein.
yeah, it's protein, baby. When storing and preparing products, all necessary procedures are followed. But we have already contacted the manufacturer for further clarification, and the entire batch in which the product in in which the product of inadequate quality was found has been discarded. Oh, so they're not denying it. Of course, there's no shortage of claims about insects being found in the food produced by fast food outlets in the U.S. However, the reports were enough to prompt opposition politician and television personality Ksenia Sobchak to say on her Telegram channel that the new Russian chain, quote, doesn't quite honor the standards of McDonald's, at least in terms of product quality control. Today alone, at least 3 cases have been recorded when burgers with moldy buns were sold to catering customers, she said, later posting that customers had also been given sauces that had gone beyond their best before date.
This is where we're going to see where corruption really reigns prevalent in a society like that. When you start messing with food and beverages, it doesn't take long for the corruption and the bypassing of standard operating procedures to break down.
So, from The Guardian, AI powered technology will be used to speed up offside calls at the World Cup. Sensor inside the ball will send out location data 500 times a second. FIFA claim average decision time will fall from 70 seconds to 25 seconds.
Also makes some really cool replay data when you're looking at this across a league-wide sport.
My
Semi-automated offside technology.
Tyler, there was now that you're talking about the FIFA, the tennis stuff and everything, it just reminded me, when we were talking about unions and automation, there was a situation in Major League Baseball the past week where in one particular game an umpire like made a whole bunch of bad strike calls, and they know that because of technology, because now on you could watch it on TV, they could put the strike zone, they know of the balls in the strike zone, and
Right.
there's a real call about whether or not they should just automate the umpires out of the game, particularly for the home plate for the balls and strikes,
Right.
because it could be done better on computer now than it could be done by a human.
Yep.
One of the business models for sports that's really important to consider is whether or not essentially it can be played in multiple areas. It's not just whether you see it on TV, it's whether or not you have your kids playing it down the street. And one of the things that sets FIFA out from many, many other sports leagues is they say we want to make sure this can be done in the poorest places in the world. If you just have a ball and you can essentially improvise a net, as long as people know the basic rules, you can just set the whole thing up. Compare this to a game like lacrosse, or you have like essentially you have to suit up a bunch, or something like fencing where you might have thousands of dollars worth of gear. Those in themselves essentially are sports because many sports have a fundamental underlying business model. So when you see decisions about that made with like MLB and other groups like that, that's one of the trade-offs they're having to make in the background going, is this technology we can use for broadcast? Is if we change a fundamental game thing, will this actually affect how people play the game elsewhere in the world? Baseball is a big deal in Japan and other places, even though it's essentially more of an American-based sport. It's something that has those sorts of decisions. That's one of the things they have to balance against.
Okay, next up, UK's Oxford Quantum Circuits raised $47 million Series A for quantum computing as a service. So here comes quantum computer accessibility for all. This could be amazing. That could be amazing. Next one, the drought in the West could bring about a data center reckoning. Yeah, we've been wondering this one. We've been scratching our heads on this one as the southwest corner of the U.S. is going through significant water stress. How are all these data centers and chip fabs gonna function?
Food and water, you'd think get higher priority, but those things drink a lot of water. And they're also long-term contracts that typically are very flashy, and they say, "Look, we'll bring jobs to the economy." It's like, oh, 100 of them, and plug that thing into the giant solar array over there.
Yeah, Cheryl had this one pinned up earlier, I think. It says, when it comes to water use, data centers are the tech industry's secret water hogs, and they could soon come under increased scrutiny. It says, the West is parched and getting more so by the day. Lake Mead, the country's largest reservoir, is nearing dead pool levels, meaning it may soon be too low to flow downstream. The entirety of the Four Corners plus California is mired in megadrought. Amid this, hundreds of the country's data centers use vast amounts of water to hum along. Dozens cluster around major metro centers, including those in mandatory and voluntary water restrictions in place. Exactly how much water, however, is an open question. Anyway, it's a problem. So the
That
next,
sort of circles us back to the first half of this show where we
yeah,
talked about those droughts. And Lake Mead is something I've been watching for several months now. It is not being replenished, and that's a big concern.
true that.
Wasn't there didn't we report on and talk about some of these data centers or some organizations looking to not co-locate, relocate some of these data centers underwater as opposed to having them on land anymore? Does anybody have any information about that?
I've seen one
I
article.
don't have it, but I did see one article about that several
Yeah,
weeks ago.
yeah, I think several months ago. I remember one article about that.
Yeah.
The next is here. Saud Amini found one from BBC about drug smugglers using underwater drones to smuggle drugs. That's kind of genius. Underwater drones seized by Spanish police who say it is the first time they have discovered this kind of unmanned submersible.
Do you want to be the guy on the drug sub that gets arrested? I mean, why not just send the robot to do your work for you?
Drone submarine drug smugglers. Kind of genius. The next is from Dr. Fran from the New York Times. 3D printing grows beyond its novelty roots. According to the New York Times, with the technology improving and costs falling, 3D printing could be poised to play a major role in manufacturing.
It's not just 3D printed with additive manufacturing. It's dropping, like, manufacturing costs for many advanced technologies are nosediving. Five axis mills, these used to be literally like banned for exports under ITAR provisions because you can use them to make all sorts of fun things from reactors to nuclear refineries to fighter jet parts and all sorts of other things. Yeah, those things used to be so advanced and cost millions of dollars. You can literally pick up essentially cheap ones now for 10 grand to 30 grand from any of 100 different vendors. So there's about 12 main ones and about four that have market share. But it's like there's literally hundreds of thousands of these in the world now. The price points of these are just nosediving, and the cost of setting up a community manufactory is becoming much more accessible day by day. When you start looking at China and USA, I don't know, I'm sure if they're actually going to go through with the decoupling exercise with things, but at least there's the rhetoric for it. If that actually does occur and we see more supply chain disruptions like you saw for with COVID, and then groups say maybe this is a longer term trend that the shipping companies can't get their shit together, that the supply chain groups essentially lean manufacturing was too much. You might see essentially not just onshoring, but more of a vertical integration strategy. Tesla was able to maneuver like very few other automotive groups were because they insisted so heavily on doing vertical in-house manufacturing rather than having networks of suppliers. And you're going to see that same sort of strategy play out with many other manufacturers where they start looking at, well, what automation technology exists? What can I get off the shelf? Can I just buy the robot that makes the machine? And can I buy the machine that makes essentially my parts? And then the skilled labor component just doesn't even enter into the equation. I mean, it does kind of, but it's not like it used to be. So you're going to see a whole bunch of considerations for that from traditional suppliers that are one sector, but you're also going to see a lot of new entrants that essentially have traditionally just outsourced and not have to worry about it. So interesting things in play right now with advanced technologies on not just additive manufacturing, but the manufacturing sector in general.
I have a question. I read a lot of science fiction, and they always talk about printers that print food. Is that going to be possible in the future?
Yes, synth meat. That's literally what synth meat is. Essentially, you've got essentially the biological components in a vat, and then one of the final steps that you have to have for it is essentially the texture parts of that. For whether or not you get like the things that resemble like fat or gristle or things like those components. In order to make those, you need to have some sort of physical actuator to do that. And the final age of that after the cells are grown is depositing. And the food printers are definitely a thing that they're already here. It's just a matter of whether or not they fit the palatable things. Some of the higher end restaurants are already doing it for like cakes and stuff for 3D food printers. You can purchase those right now. But they're working with essentially for like tubes and pastes and such. There's not a lot of culinary flexibility necessarily on the material ingredients. It's experimental. It's not something that is like established. There's a lot of room for innovation if you're interested in the topic though, because they're doing this in the higher end restaurants.
I'm,
Yeah,
I'm
if
printing.
you want to talk about
I'm printing carrots and limes and all kind of shit right outside right
You
outside the
eat
restaurant.
it?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
well, if you look
Check
at
the back
3D
channel.
printing just from a chemical manufacturing perspective and what they can do with it, they're right now the fusing of metal alloys is something that's happening, which is what's going to make products in the future if the viability is there, meaning like if there's a market for it for like higher end items. So the fact that you can actually fuse it and you'd actually be able to cook it chemically, like if making a metal alloy is very similar to creating a recipe in a food manufacturing plant. So you'd actually be able to cook the food while you make it if you have the ingredients in a powder form. So it would have to be powder and then somehow create like a liquid with water to make the entire fusion happen. But totally possible.
Yeah, there's no fundamental like theoretical boundaries. It's more just about like implementation. One thing to pay attention to that's a non-traditional place for 3D printing. Look up a company called Relativity Space. They have the Stargate printer. Literally, they did something unusual. They said this entire like rocket ship, like SpaceX styles, made by a bunch of SpaceX engineers. normally this would be thousands of bill of material parts that you have to like put all together. They're saying let's just print the entire thing, even the fuel tank. And people are like, even the fuel tank? That's kind of wasteful. You can just buy it off the shelf. It's like, no, that's not the point. We want to be able to make these on Mars. So that you still need to plug in a couple motors on the side, but that reduces the bill of parts from like tens of thousands to like 20. And
Yeah, and more real life, that like what's happening now and why this is becoming such a big industry is you can actually print parts for like tanks in
sure,
war.
yeah, it's happening
Like
right
so
now.
long. Yeah, which exactly.
One little fun anecdote with things to give you an example of like how manufacturing technology evolves. So the U.S. military spent literally over it hundreds of billions of dollars. It might have been a trillion. It's something absurd on the stealth bomber program. Like this was a huge undertaking. That required essentially the
Oh
smart scientists,
well.
all the material scientists, and everything. But what happened is essentially they lost the blueprints. Like they were so secretive about it, they couldn't figure out essentially like how to build the components. So when they're going, well, we need to do maintenance on it because some of these parts are end of life. They're like, we don't know how to make them anymore. So what they're literally putting forms out in like in 3D printer forms and like people that do like advanced manufacturing, they're saying come in and scan an existing bomber with reverse engineering tech, reverse engineer it, and then reprint it out with essentially a modern 5-axis machine and modern manufacturing technologies for like the heat grills or whatever. And what's crazy about that is we're at the level of technology now where you don't necessarily need to have a full schematic. You can actually have improvisation and have completely different manufacturing processes, but they still resemble the original forms. And being able to do this essentially with not just skilled labor, like machinists, working in the machine shop and creating like some super secret project, but literally it's like, okay, here's the scan, put it into the robot, clean it up a little bit. I hit the print button and it's like plug it in, did it work, and make 2 changes. All right, it's good now. Like that is the cycles that we're aiming at here, and that's going to fundamentally change a lot of how we relate to the things that we have as material goods rather than having a factory that has to be retooled and have an extraordinary amount of capital expenditure for creating these giant things, and so you're hunting for the lowest labor cost in the world, etc. It might just be you've got your community neighborhood and manufactory that generally can make any of 10,000 different goods. It's like you just want it rather than buying it off the shelf. You just have your local neighborhood make it.
Yeah,
The
it just
robot already has 10,000 designs ready to go.
exactly. It's all about the cost effectiveness of it, right? Like if you can manufacture 10,000 metal steel poles cheaper than you can print them, then they're going to continue to manufacture them. But once you get the cost down where printing becomes cheaper, there's going to be less room and reason for manufacturing facilities.
We have flexibility now with our new parts that just didn't exist before. Like it used to be essentially tooling costs were so high that you have to once you pay that cost for making that one kind of car, that one kind of shish kebab stick, that one toy for Christmas, it can't make anything else because there's so much you have to pay for the tooling. With flexible manufacturing, the newest methods of automation, the new ways of doing things, this means that you can make a very wide degree of different types of products, and you still have labor in there, but they're doing very, very different things from a traditional factory. And it's going to be this is the future. It is happening very quickly all around us,
Absolutely.
and it's
It's
happening
happening right
essentially at
now.
low
It's
costs.
happening right now,
Yeah,
particularly in the metal alloys industry. Absolutely. If you have a product where you're using the same chemicals to make the same thing, you can make it in 50 billion different parts and types if it has the same chemical compound. The same chemicals used within it, and you could use that in the same machine. You wouldn't have to change out cartridges. So it's really fascinating.
Okay, are we ready for the last little batch of tweets here? The first one is from Saudamini that tomorrow is July 6th, and a scary solar storm is scheduled to hit the Earth tomorrow due to
it was nice knowing you guys.
a
It's been
massive
nice. It's real.
sunspot blast solar wind. A big solar storm will be hitting the Earth tomorrow, July 6th, after a cyclops-like sunspot ejected out a large amount of solar material. So cover your gadgets in tinfoil, everybody.
Where's the
And
article on that, Tyler? Is that on the Twitter
I
account?
just yes, you go to the Twitter account pinned at the top of the room, TNATW, and you will see I just retweeted that one. And now I'm retweeting one from BB that Tesla unveils a solar range extender trailer with SpaceX Starlink internet terminal. So Tesla has unveiled a new solar range extender trailer. So it's a trailer that you tow behind your car or truck, and it has solar panels that cascade out like awnings. To in total, you get 9 solar panels out of this. You have one on top. You basically all 9 converge down to one, and you can see it. I just retweeted it. It's very cool looking. And I did hint, did I not, going back many months ago, 6 months ago, um, that Tesla's interested in a van that would have cascading solar panel awnings, precisely like this.
This strategy works really well for vehicles where you, instead of essentially having like cover every surface with a solar panel, it's tow a trailer that you can just unfold when you get to your destination, just have it recharge once you get there. This strategy actually works really well.
Tesla has unveiled a new phone. So anyway, they showed it in Germany. You can't order it currently, but it
And
folds down into a very very reasonable size. Yeah,
yeah,
Also, Starlink is low power.
yes. And it also has a Starlink that those dishes as well. So it provides both electricity and internet link as well. So I think this is a very charming product in future.
If you think about it, this would pair very well with the Tesla truck and
yes,
more of an off-grid like camping lifestyle or long range off um I don't want to say off-road, but that's sort of if
apocalypse.
you're not living in a
Yeah,
regular environment.
post-apocalyptic.
You're, you're
Mad
Right.
Max.
you're looking for zombie apocalypse is the phrase you're looking for.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. It's I have it on order.
In a water-parched landscape of the future where all jobs have been automated.
Let's make that movie. So last but not least, Thomas Tong found this one that NASA accuses China of running military space program to control the moon. China says this
Whoa.
China says this is simply a smear campaign by the U.S.
Yeah, but in
We
order
didn't see
to
that coming
control the
when they said
moon,
there was debris that nobody wanted to take
That was
accountability
funny.
for. We saw
yeah,
By
it
the way,
coming.
there's a gentleman on this platform. His name is Diston. He actually creates software that actually tracks things, and it does love that. That story was absolutely amazing. Not only because essentially of like who was tracking things, but just how old and how broken a lot of our tracking infrastructure is. It's absolutely astounding. A lot of it was like data errors that just got propagated across a lot of other things. And then so when people were trying to figure out what actually was going on, that the systems kept on giving them errors and stuff. So it's a fascinating story if you actually dig deep into that one. By the way, just real quick, essentially about why would anyone want the moon? So military groups looked heavily at this. If you look at Carl Sagan's early career, one of the first things he actually did was advising the president and putting together a study on essentially what they could do with the moon. The original plan wasn't to put a man on the moon; it was to nuke the moon and show essentially as a dominance of United States, military might in the heavens. It didn't test well at the focus group, so they ended up just going with the astronaut program of inspiring put a man on the moon things. But if you get some fun with the physics, short version is if you have the moon, you can shoot small rocks back at Earth, and that would be devastating. They don't talk about that part very much because they like to think of common heritage, mankind, nice happy things. If you do establish things on the moon, which we signed a military agreement with Russia that we would not weaponize space, that lapsed recently. But essentially, the whole thing about we were not going to weaponize space, these were part of a large number of other things that you can do in space that are difficult to do on the ground that start to become very interesting. There's also less spacecraft we never built, etc. So I'm not sure if they're going to essentially unlock that because China didn't sign any of those treaties.
Well,
And if
there
they
was
did,
another.
This,
yeah.
to me, this just
I'm so
sounds
sorry,
like
Chris.
narrative, just more narrative about setting up against for a dispute with the Chinese. And I wanted to know about that Tesla thing. If you unfold all of those panels, they're saying it will give you 50 miles of range. So it's not exactly particularly useful.
It's enough for a Starlink.
Well, if you remember, just a few weeks ago, China announced that they were going to be launching satellites into space to capture solar power and shoot it back at the Earth.
China's freaked out when they started to realize that Starlink could be used for military communications like in Ukraine and going, wait, how many tens of thousands of these things are launching? Wait, who's paying for this? It's like, oh my, we don't have the same level of private domestic space industry, but we also don't have the same military things. They're starting to. They're cloning rockets as fast as they can. And pretty soon they're going making some of their own designs, like original stuff, and they're moving really quick. So
I believe they 100% understood.
I'm sorry.
Well, they just announced that they're decreasing their amount of manufacturing operations in the shipping industry. So they're actually going to decrease the number of ships that they're making for supply chains.
Right. So where the manufacturing resource is going to go will be interesting to see.
So, Tyler, there's one last story that Cheryl just pinned. And actually, Chris, this might be a story that you can comment on because I'm sure you know a lot more about it than most people. I just pinned it. I just had to pin it because I saw the story come out while we were doing this, whatever we call this room. It came out, live. So, but it's about a collider or something. You might want to look at that.
There's another room hosted right now, essentially, in another thing where they're actually talking about this morning. Jury's still on a little bit parts about how much of the simulation stuff, but there's actually there's an active community here on Clubhouse that's talking about this right now. It's actually very exciting.
Okay.
The other breaking news that came out was the UK Chancellor and the Health Minister just resigned.
Whoa.
What was
The
that? I'm sorry, I missed that.
health minister just resigned.
And the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the head of the economy, Rishi Sunak.
Wow.
CERN say this just came out today as well. CERN, or the Large Hadron, the collider, LHC, the Large Hadron Collider. They say they've discovered 3 new subatomic particles never seen before.
I can
And
give just a
Exciting.
little bit of context about what they're actually saying there. So one very brief thing is when they fire these things up, they're extremely sensitive. Part of the thing for collider physics is whether or not you build linear or circular. The idea is you're trying to screen against an enormous amount of noise because it's almost like learning how the universe works by crashing cars together and seeing the parts as they fly off and then trying to guess how the engine works. That's when they're doing these sorts of things. CERN is one of the last projects we might build on this for a very, very long time of big science, put all of your eggs in one basket. And they've been trying to essentially rebuild it. Actually, it's not trying. It's just been part of their maintenance schedules for the last 2 or 3 years. Has literally just been rebuilding the thing so it can essentially try a whole different set of experiments. So what they're literally looking for is like you see essentially like a map of like on a line. They're looking for little bumps that essentially signal that essentially something doesn't match up with a model or does match up with another model. That was how they found the original Higgs boson, and I would imagine that they were essentially trying to set a look for a new set of particles with their new set of experiments. I haven't looked at the paper specifically, but that's the sort of thing that the facility is built out for, along with some really other cool side projects that are fun to explore.
they say they found a new kind of pentaquark and the first ever pair of tetraquarks.
Oh, that is very shiny.
Sounds like an amazing new alternative band. The tetraquarks.
I got to watch the Higgs boson release live with a friend that actually he worked on his specialty was quantum chromodynamics, and it's like, what is that? And he's like, well, here's how it changes color as it's going through. It's like, oh, that's cool. But it was interesting because he wasn't necessarily during they did the Higgs boson thing. He wasn't necessarily sure the data actually because they had a lot of internal false alarms internally going whether or not they found something or not. And part of the analysis is could take weeks or months to essentially analyze the data and go and say, is that signal statistically significant? Is that thing actually there? We don't want to pre-announce something and then find out, oops, it wasn't actually there was sensor noise or we didn't plug something in right. So when we were looking at the data, and he was pointing out like this is good, that part's a little sketchy, but that part's really good. Yeah, it looks like they found it. That same sort of internal review is something that they're having to go that they had to go through to essentially for this release. Although I imagine with the boldness they're saying and how recently they turned it on, it must have been a very strong signal for them to find that. So that's very exciting if it turns out. And it sounds like it did.
Okay, well that does it. Nicholas, any hot story to share today?
No hot stories, just the slow motion crisis
Yeah,
continuing to unfold as we suggested, and
wreck in
obviously
slow mo.
watching the Germans at the moment, and just it's pretty bad out there, it seems, and it is cascading, but it's like I say, a slow-mo cascade.
Hey, Nicholas, I have a question on British government there. If they, I think Boris Johnson just survived a no confidence vote, and now you have these resignations. Can they do another no confidence vote after they just had one? I mean, is there like some time period that has to pass before they can do a second no confidence vote?
I think that his resignation is going to precipitate a change, and I believe I haven't seen the letter, but in the letter he is scathing by all accounts. So it feels a bit like Geoffrey Howe and savaging Margaret Thatcher is what I would say is the rhyming clause. So yes, I believe that he could be challenged again and or shamed, but he's pretty brazen, so I'm not sure he'll be moved easily.
Okay, y'all, that does it for today. Well done. Well, that was a long one. 2, 3, a nearly 4-hour session.
I couldn't believe you were still going. I only
Yeah,
dropped in at the very end.
we are. And then Ben has the home automation improved sustainability room
Yes,
going
it's
on
still
now.
running now. Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
it's been going an hour and 42 minutes. So
yeah.
we'll see many of you over there. See you tomorrow.
Same
Bye,
bat
all.
time, same bat channel.
See you tomorrow.
Annalisa